Hello, so welcome to, I'd say, a rather impromptu stream that I'm beginning at the end of this week. I'm broadcasting, I think it's the second week of January, and this has been one of the craziest weeks in American politics. I think we've seen the definitive end of the election drama, and I think the end of a certain era of right wing politics. And I know a lot of people online, particularly on the distant and populist right, there's a lot of, I think, unhappiness going on around. And I kind of want to just do the stream to get people talking, to get people's concerns addressed to a certain degree. Obviously, I'm not happy with this situation. We can go over for exactly what happened, but as I usually like to do, I just like to let people get in and actually let me know that they can hear me speaking on the microphone that I'm using. So yes, if people are watching this in the future, because I don't imagine anyone watching it in the present forgets what happened this last week, the second week of January. What we had is a protest, an incident in the Capitol. The votes were counted. The votes were about to be counted to confirm the electoral college vote for Joe Biden being the next president, and there was some type of protest. And I guess it's unclear at this stage who were the lead organizers of this protest, and as things are in the digital age. And from this point, a bunch of hooligans escaped, got across the police line, potentially broke a window, and tore apart. I guess they basically ran amok in the Capitol building for about an hour before the authorities came in and removed them. During that time, one woman was shot that we know of, and we were told of other deaths that might have resulted from this action. That's not so clear. As far as we know at this stage, the only person that's confirmed dead was one of the protesters on the MAGA side. And of course, the left being the left, they've spared no time basically dancing on her grave. I think that's a little bit, that's more than a little uncouth. That's kind of disgusting in my opinion. But that's politics in the 21st century. However, since that period, very predictably, we've seen the mainstream, the cathedral, totally lose its shit. Some of it's genuine, some of it's affected, some of it's designed to, I'm shocked that you had a violent protest that took over a government building. When, of course, we all know the takeover of government buildings is de rigueur. It happened in my former hometown of Seattle. They took over City Hall. It happens pretty much regularly. And given that, from what we know now, again, it looks like most of the violence was on the government's side when it came to fatalities. It's hard to really think that the umbrage here is genuine. But regardless of whether it's sincere or affected, the mainstream lost its shit and has gone on a total rampage over the last 48 hours, banning an enormous number of people, including the president himself. And there's even been pressure, I've heard, to deplatform Nick Fuentes from what he thought was a free speech platform in DLive. So at this stage, I think the right is really, really struggling for what is going on, what it can do, and then that's, I think that's sort of where we're moving over. Someone in the chat says, 5 confirmed dead, 1 shot by police, 1 policeman killed by being hit on the head with a fire extinguisher, 1 person killed themselves with a taser, 1 got trampled to death, 2, I don't know how they died. That's a lot more bloody than what I was seeing yesterday. Maybe that's, I think that if it's as bloody, yesterday the pictures we had coming out of the Capitol were mostly they just look like your typical Antifa protests with a minor amount of violence mixed into the quote-unquote protesting. Obviously, being a reactionary, I pretty much consider all popular demonstrations to be uncouth. I know this is not shared by everyone else in the distant right community. The only question I ask people who've criticized my position on this, I just don't see what's gained by the right. I think we see what's lost. And I don't want to be a counsel of despair here by any means. I'm going to go over why, as powerful as the mainstream left and mainstream center left seems at this very moment, I think the future ahead of them is very grim. I think the future for the mainstream left is very grim. And I'll go over that in a little bit. But I know that just me saying that I don't think this was a wise action, I know even at least on Wednesday that was getting a lot of pushback. They were doing this whole thing where if you ask questions about the efficacy of a certain action, then you are being a coward, or you're sort of breaking solidarity with the protesters. I make absolutely no judgment on the protesters themselves, except for those who engaged in actual criminal and violent action beyond the need to defend themselves. My only question now and then was, what the hell is this going to achieve, other than to momentarily empower our enemies to completely smash what little we have in terms of organizing capacity? And I think that's more or less come down today. We had Twitter, Facebook, pretty much every other social media ban the President of the United States, which in a sort of Carl Schmittian fashion demonstrates that it's not really the president who's got ultimate executive authority. It's social media corporations that have ultimate political authority, because they can shut down the message of the president if they deem the message to be not seemly by their standards, which are constantly changing and are never consistently stated in a way that we can hold them accountable towards enforcing. And, I don't know. I think that this is sort of a predictable consequence. I do think that they're really, really overplaying their hand. But at this stage, and I think at this stage, the mainstream left, the cathedral, believes that it's won. They have every right to believe that they've won, given the realities on the ground. And they see no reason not to completely double down on their own little revenge fantasies against their perceived enemies, regardless of whether these revenge, these feelings of revenge are inspired by an actual malfeasance or crime, as in the case of the hooligans at the Capitol building, or whether this is just part of their own fevered imaginations. Part of this is the fact that the cathedral, aka the mainstream, feels their own power slowly bleeding away. Their narrative formulas aren't making any sense anymore. 2 and 2 don't equal 4 by their calculus anymore. And because of this, they are trying desperately to lash out at some actor that they can potentially blame for their own misfortunes, their own political misfortunes. And at this stage, the MAGA movements that were visible in the Capitol yesterday are as good a scapegoat as any. I don't know. I guess you can claim that this is acceleration, and indeed it is to a certain degree. I don't like accelerationism, but that's what occurred, and maybe some good will ultimately come out of it. Although I don't think that that's our job to predict that and enact accordingly. Never make things worse so that they'll get better by some reaction. I think that's foolish. But for me at this time, regardless of whether it's acceleration or not, I still don't see how any of these actions lead directly to us consolidating a way to push back on the mainstream. So I guess that's sort of where I am right now. And I feel sort of bad because, like I said, 2020 was the biggest. Politically speaking, for myself, 2020 was a year of failures. And, obviously 2020 was effectively, not actually, but effectively my first year as a father. So, what was I going to do, really? Yeah, I was dealing with less time than I have ever had before. This is not my job. It's something I do on the side. And so I wasn't obviously going to be dedicating a lot of time towards organizing, but in 2019, before I discovered that my family was going to be growing, I had committed to an organization project called the Cana Society. And in 2020, and by the end of 2019, I was convinced of one thing above all other things. And that was that core members of any organizational group had to be people who knew each other personally in real space, because I was having such a hard time getting quality control over the people that I met online, which is very predictable. And it didn't help that my main way of talking to people, not face to face, but over a chat client, Discord, kept on banning me. So I couldn't even organize a chat list very easily, because, you can use something like Matrix, or you can use something like Gab or Skype. But no one of a younger disposition ever uses that for general conversation. So that option was taken off the table after, that's like the third time getting banned from that service. We have to, at that point I said, look, the online's not working because I can't keep a stable platform. And I don't really feel like going to an alternative platform that's going to keep on banning me. I'm sure Nick Fuentes is feeling the same way. The difficulty is that when it comes to social media as we've previously known it, these companies move left not because they love the left wing. It's because there's a certain set of legal ramifications that they have to operate within. And these legal ramifications are what causes them to essentially bend the knee to people like the SPLC. And you saw that with DLive and Nick Fuentes. Now, I think that Nick Fuentes' involvement in these protests is probably exaggerated, but the SPLC knew that they had enough of a connection to go forward with their attempts to destroy him. Because I'm sure that he's, as far as threats as they see them, and in my mind, these are purely imaginary threats, he's probably on the top of their list. I wouldn't doubt. Excuse me. Yeah, I need to have a drink tonight. I rarely drink. I basically just drink for these streams, and that's it. So I can tell I'm already tired because I've got circles under my eyes. But obviously, the difficulty we're dealing with, it's not enough to get an alternative like Parler, because Parler is subject to the same constraints that all the other social media organizations are. We need to have an alternative like Urbit, or an alternative like Mastodon, or an alternative like PeerTube, or an alternative like, I guess, Matrix. That's the other one here. So really, we have a technical problem that gates us from ever being able to get spaces together where we can speak online in a consistent fashion. And so I'm dealing with that as a gate. I think that will eventually come down the line. I think it will be developed in the next few years. And then once we have that in pocket, the whole dynamic will work a lot differently. I think in order to take down something like Urbit or PeerTube or Mastodon or Matrix, the Cathedral has to cross a whole bunch of other lines that it historically has not wanted to cross. Leaning on the neck of someone like DLive is fairly easy. There's basically a script for it at this point. No one at the SPLC isn't doing anything original. They're just basically acting out their business model they've had for the last 50 years. And, they went to DLive, they made a few threats, they played some out of context Nick Fuentes clips, and boom, they have one of the most prolific actors, prolific leaders of the dissident right out of commission, really without a second thought. They even got, what's so funny is they're even going after some of the distant left wing. I believe this afternoon they banned Red Alert, Red Scare, which is a podcast that's what I would call a distant left wing perspective. It's a left wing worker podcast with communist sympathies that does not subscribe to the woke ideology, and they got rid of it. So it's obvious that these people are acting in a paranoid fashion. Where was I going with this? I guess what I wanted to say is that, this year for myself, 2020, has been a bit of a failure because there's several things that are apparent to me. First, in order to get online networking together, we need to have something that works differently, not as just owned by a different party than the mainstream social media platforms. That's the first observation. The second observation I'm doing this the German way, eins, zwei. The second observation is that when it comes to a serious organization, we need to have in real life meetings kind of precede online creation, at least for the few founding members. I kind of put my trust in a few people, and I know that this happened with other people on the Dissident Right too. There are a lot of unethical actors. There are a lot of people that they would have called adventurers in a previous age. They're in it. I mean, that basically means they're in it for the lols. There's a lot of people who are out to make a profit or who are very willing to switch sides when it's apparent that this movement is not on the winning side momentarily. And because of that, the incentives to betray people and to leak information sort of exploded. And it becomes something that is very hard to deal with when you're not being professionally organized or when you don't have a legal team. And I'm not so sure exactly how to get around that. This is sort of compounded with the fact that if you're a right-winger, there's this whole grifter idea. And this is a real phenomenon, and I know I'm rambling here, but bear with me. On the right, I think since basically 2018, 2017, and this is something that I think Nick Fuente kicked off in a sense. A lot of people were pointing to the fact that a lot of the people that were considered the core dissident right figures, like Milo Yiannopoulos and Mike Cernovich, were transparently mercenary. They didn't really care. Matthew Heinbach would be another one, also a really disgusting individual as well in that case. They didn't really care about the ideology. What they cared about was the spectacle, because they were interested in getting notoriety and networking capital from participating in a movement. And because of this, they saw that the rising right wing was something that the mainstream media wouldn't touch. And so it was essentially an untapped market to promote themselves. At this stage, all of those individuals are on their way out now. Really, at this stage, given the fact that it's so easy to crack down on actors and destroy their finances, people like Mike Cernovich, I've been told that he basically retired from politics, which I think says a lot about why he was in this to begin with. But at any rate, in 2017 and 2018, Nick Fuentes and a variety of other people were right to point out that a lot of the people that were the ideological leaders of the right wing weren't actually committed to the ideological mission of anything that could be considered either right wing or dissident. And there was the accusation of being a grifter that was being tossed around at people like Mike Cernovich and Lauren Southern and so on and so forth. Although I do think Lauren Southern has been taken, from my reading, Lauren Southern was more taken in by grifters than she was actually a non-believer herself. I think that in her heart of hearts, I think she is some kind of conservative, although I really doubt she has anything particularly figured out. I don't think she's a very deep thinking individual. But I don't think she intentionally was in this only for the money. But this caused a lot of people in 2018 and 2019 to toss around this accusation of being a grifter. And of course, the left wing, kind of being the scavengers they are, they were really fast to pick up on this. And they immediately went to this grifter accusation against anyone on the right wing who was making any amount of money that they could support a family off of. This is the same problem that we have this is the same problem I have with this channel. I couldn't possibly support a family off of the work I do here. And it's not just that, maybe if I did this full time and if the super chats were as generous as they were, weekly or daily as they are when I do this once every month, then, maybe hypothetically I could. But the fact is they probably wouldn't. And in the meantime, my livelihood would be at the mercy of a platform that's almost certainly going to ban me at some point. I don't think that my YouTube has that much longer to go. But at any rate, the left wing, both the mainstream and the radical, realized that they could use this accusation against any party. And so there's this phenomenon where if you're making money doing right-wing content, you're a grifter. And it's sort of impossible to live down. it's birthed from, but at any rate, what we have now, in addition to this, in addition to being sort of inundated by people who are purely mercenary, and in addition to being having the funding taken away from us and not having a business model, that's kind of the ultimate irony, is that in addition to being called grifters if you make any money off of this endeavor, the means by which you have to make money are evaporating. In addition to this, we also have the situation where the moral hazard of being associated with radical actions is really insanely high. And, I think that I really worry for Nick Fuentes. I've had my personal disagreements with Nick Fuentes in the past. It's no secret that we don't get along, or we didn't get along in 2017 or 18 when we still, were on live streams together. I think that happened once. But I still feel worried about him because I think that at this stage the mainstream left is going to throw the book at everyone. The mainstream left is going to go after everyone that they considered to be a thorn in their side. They're going to turn up the vindictiveness to 11. And I kind of wonder what the ultimate fate of this is going to be, because this is the problem. I think right now, and there's a reason why I'm streaming right now, and I'm going to try to make more content over the next few months, is because I think right now it's just a critical bridge for us to cross. It's going to suck to be on the right wing or on the counter-progressive wing for about 4 to 6 months. It's really going to suck because there's not going to be any money. The social media platforms are going to be banning people left and right. I might even get banned. But then in about 6 months, and I really do mean in about 6 months, this narrative that we have about the secret Nazi conspiracy to invade the Capitol that happened in early January is going to be transparently false, and it's going to be massively overplayed. And at that stage, the cathedral, aka the mainstream left, is going to realize that it doesn't have any narratives that really work in any meaningful way. It doesn't have any narratives that it can use. It can't tell any stories. What's also going to be the problem is in about 6 months, the radical left and the center left are going to realize, okay, we've banned pretty much everyone we could ban without causing serious problems for ourselves. There's going to be that moment from The Simpsons, that stop beating him, he's already dead. That's going to be the reaction to the abuse heaped upon the remainder of the populist right. And the radical left is going to start making demands on the center left. And it's not clear right now, really, if the center left has any stories in its bag of tricks by which it can say no to the radical left. And so I think the compromise is going to be that they're going to try to concede on the cultural issues. They're going to do what they usually do. They're going to try to concede on the cultural issues, while at the same time holding the line on the economic issues so they can shield their own donor class from breaking rank. But I wonder how long that's going to go on, because I think for the second half, for the first 6 months of 2021, I think it's going to be largely focused on revenge against the right wing and revenge against the dissidents and revenge against the populists. But that's slowly going to taper out. And unless there is some huge problem that happens between now and, say, May, the question about how to actually govern the country might inconveniently insert itself into our national conversation. And at that stage, I'm wondering what's going to happen, because the government is either going to go insane, or you're going to have a set of increasingly insane protests and demonstrations from the radical left, from the little communist army that the radical left's built up over the last 3 years against the mainstream left. I don't know. I mean, what is that going to look like? I think that is in that division. I think there's the opportunity to start building things that are new and that march under the general framework of being anti-progressive. Because what I imagine is we're going to get to some uber corporate, uber woke reality, because that's the only compromise that the mainstream left can make. And at that stage, I am really wondering how people like Vaush or people like really anyone on the radical left can really portray themselves as being the downtrodden underdog, or sort of the shit posting poet of the masses that's taking it to the man. That's a question. I think people really underestimate how important it is for narrative control to be in place. I'm making a video on this subject that will be a lot more considered than this live stream, which is all over the place, I know. But Gaetano Mosco talked about things called political formulas, which when you break it down, it's essentially narratives that support power operations. People don't understand that these political narratives are really an important previous step to any kind of institution building. Any institution has to have a story around it that makes sense. Currently, I don't know if there's a story around even things like the Republican Party that makes sense. And in short order, without the Republican Party, there's not going to be a very realistic story around why the Democratic Party makes sense. And once those institutions start to fade away, what actually happens? It's not very clear. The most important thing to do if you're on the right, or if you're a dissident of any variety, of the Red Scare variety or of the Nick Fuentes variety, is to simply make observations, bear witness to what's going on right now, and to make sure that there's a narrative for your own life and for your own identity that makes sense, even as the narratives that undergird the rest of these institutions collapse around us. I made an entire 2-hour video giving advice to people last week, and that probably was really overdoing it, but my advice right now is I don't know what platforms we can stay on. So I don't know. Maybe my wife got off of Twitter and I have half a mind of deleting my Twitter account. I'm not particularly interested in Parler or Gab. I don't really like Twitter in my life generally, to be quite honest. I think it's a horribly anti-human technology. I think it destroys time. The only reason why I use it is because it's a brilliant promotional tool. And, as a parent, I tend to have these little 5-minute periods of time, and that are way too short to do anything except check Twitter, maybe post a tweet. So it fills these little periods of idleness. Maybe it'd be better if I just had those as silence to myself, and I focused more on doing larger things, like maybe I should start a Substack. But I can't tell you now. I don't think anyone knows seriously now, in the middle of this purge, what tools we will have available to us to use our voices at all. I don't have the answer to that. But I do know with some amount of certainty that the mainstream left can't ban all of us, and it can't ban all platforms. We'll be able to speak somewhere. And in those spaces, we need to use whatever opportunity we have to talk about our own stories, and they need to be as true as we can make them and as honest as we can make them about our lives, our realities, and our larger dreams for the potential of humanity. I think the two things that are really characteristic of the left right now is, in the words of the Franklin, they're absolutely hideous. The Klaus Schwab view of what the human race should become is hideous. The Vaush and ContraPoint's vision of what the human race should be is hideous. It's disgusting. Vaush and ContraPoint's imagine some kind of hedonistic, fully automated luxury communism, which is not something that is at all aspirational when you get down to it. It's not heroic. The only way it even looks heroic for a moment is that they imagine that there's some vast right-wing conspiracy that they're raging at so that they can get to the Edenic, messianic age that is fully luxuriated gay space communism. The problem is that we have little pockets of fully automated luxury gay space communism that exist in every shit-tier leftist Twitch streamer on the platform right now. And fully automated luxury gay space communism is not some Hebraic age of prophecy. It's a squalid existence of dopamine hits, transparently depressed people who have no larger goal in reality other than their own distraction, basically. And All the while, you can't help but notice that fully automated luxury gay space communism is not only compatible with the capitalist endgames of people like Klaus Schwab and the Great Replacement, but is an indispensable tool for their vision of the world, where a small amount of elites actually do the work and subsequently control the property, where the vast majority of other people are lulled to sleep with soma in all of the varieties of form. By the way, soma was an ancient drug taken by the Aryans to help them with visions, and the way I'm using it now, it was the drug from A Brave New World. That was sort of a sort of turbo dopamine that made you very, very complacent about your fate and what was going on, and that was very, very pleasant to take. So for people wondering what soma means, but that is essentially what fully luxury gay space communism is. That's the only future that Vaush promises. That's the only future that ContraPoints promises. I mean, when it really gets down to it, right, that's the only future that they promise. And the only heroism that they have is dependent on the existence of a fantastical myth that somehow we're in the midst of some kind of Nazi coup. I always think about this like, they want to portray this as if Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer are the heroic resistance against some cyber Hitler Trump, Trump Hitler 2.0 attempt to take over the United States. This narrative is ridiculous. A bunch of hooligans broke into the Capitol building for an hour. That's what happened. That's obviously what happened. And trying to portray this as if it's some kind of like epic struggle against a greater foe is insane. I'm imagining this is sort of a Hallmark made-for-television movie, or perhaps a B-list movie that comes out in the theaters and that very few people watch. You can imagine like Jack Dorsey and Nancy Pelosi racing against the clock, like they're in their cars and the tense music is playing, and they banned Trump just in time, just before he was able to send that one tweet that would have completed the Nazi takeover of the United States. And they banned him just in time. It was they're such underdogs, and the CEO of all the major corporations and the elected government of the United States, they just barely stopped Trump Hitler. That's what it would be if it were a movie, and that's the narrative that we have to believe in order to make our reality make any kind of sense. Or at least the heroic portion of this story to make any sense. I mean, they can make that, we have power, so we're just doing this. And I notice there's a whole group of these horrible people like Faraday Speaks and Counterpoints, the guy with the most unoriginal YouTube name ever. These are the sort of anti-right-wing people. And whenever I talk to them about something like the sexual revolution or modern modes of living and how we have to fundamentally reform the economic system or any number of these things, they always go like, oh, Dave, well, like the past isn't coming back. The 1950s aren't coming back. You can't possibly do that. They never argue that my assertion that the modern life is squalid is inaccurate. They never disagree with the fact that in many ways there's a lot of elements of past existences that was preferable, even though those past existences had less money attached to them. All they say is that it's not coming back. And the only reason why it's not coming back is that people in power aren't allowing it to take root. We know from examples like Israel that if there's a government that partially is friendly to religious communities that want to live in a parallelistic society, this can be accomplished with fairly good results. And it essentially removes the need to even have massive replacement level immigration rates, because you can essentially grow locally through separatist communities the next generation of your elites. And so, I mean, it's not that this reality couldn't come to exist. It's that they're basically chutzpah, right? Literally chutzpah. And what is chutzpah? In the old Yiddish expression, chutzpah it's sort of the brazen temerity. Temerity is a good synonym for chutzpah, but in the classic rabbi joke, chutzpah is the guy who murders his parents and then pleads for leniency because he's an orphan. And what these anti-right-wing activists want is they want the ability to sidestep conversations about how they want to sidestep conversations about what's a good way to live and what's a good future to aspire for, with a reality, by saying that it's realistically not available to us. And of course, why is it realistically not available to us? Well, it's largely due to the political efforts that they themselves are trying to support. So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy fulfilled by the prophets themselves. Someone's telling me not to drink too much. I have one drink of whiskey here. This is the same whiskey and water drink I have every time I'm on one of these streams. Are people worried that I'm going to get drunk on this? A half a glass of whiskey? Man, you guys did not know me in college. I used to drink a lot back then. I was not a lightweight. I guess I'm literally not a lightweight still, but there's literally no possibility that I'm going to get even a little tipsy off of this. I guess I'm tired. Any slurring of my speech, I assure you, does not come from alcohol consumption. It comes from me not properly managing my sleep schedule. But anyway, well, I guess that's my spiel. I'd like to advise people to not lose hope during this winter that we have to get ourselves through, because once this winter lifts, I think we're going to be in a deceptively stronger position than anyone suspects. Actually, to tell you the truth, when I saw that Twitter's Jack Dorsey had banned Donald Trump, I knew that our enemies were a lot weaker than they let on. Because if Trump is done, I shouldn't say if the right wing is done, why would you go to such a great effort and ban and deplatform a sitting president that shows so many cards for basically nothing, for catharsis? If our enemy is willing to basically expend so much money or so much effort in terms of its own credibility just to dunk on an opponent where they basically have already defeated, that shows it shows either an incredible emotional insecurity or an incredible imprudence and foolishness on the part of our enemies. Probably both. And in this case, I think that the real takeaway from this is our enemies are desperate and emotional, and they're doing things that are fundamentally stupid for themselves. The difficulty is that no reasonable alternative to them has emerged yet, and I think that's really what we're trying to hope for / create / witness on the world stages, some alternative to the two worldviews of the left, either the radical one or the quote unquote moderate one, the globalist one, which are both variations of a fully automated luxury gay space communism. I mean, is there really that much difference? The communists say they want to have people own the means of production. They won't even let people who politically disagree with them own Twitter accounts. The fuck they want people to own the means of production. What would any leftist ever want a right-winger to own anything approaching the means of production? Of course they don't. They only say we want the workers to own the means of production because they assume that what they're talking about is a political body that is uniformly left-wing. They don't understand the process by which people even change their minds. They're not even trying to convince people to change their minds. But all they really mean by that is we want to have 100% of the political power, and we want that to immediately be transferable to redistributions of wealth back to our client classes. I mean, that's essentially both what the moderate left and the and the radical left are asking for. They just have different language to justify their seizing of that power. No communist respects a right-wing worker's ability to own the tools that he needs to do his work. They take the tools that people need to do their work away from them all the time when it comes to deplatforming. And no one who participates in this cancel culture shit can ever legitimately claim to be a believer in property of the proletariat. I mean, that's what really it comes down to. And I actually really hope that I can make good on my promise to make some progress on that economics video / book I've always claimed I always want to be working on. The fundamental question is property. The left doesn't believe in property. They believe that property should be an extension of leftist political projects. Even if it came down to this whole equalist distribution of property, there's no way that any leftist would ever want a right-winger to have property in a way that could facilitate that right-winger's prominence in the political square, or prominence in the political square, or the public square writ large. It's transparent at this stage. And so what it really comes down to is the understanding of that the communism of the left, of the intersectional left at least, is a lie. The communism of Vosh is a lie. The communism of ContraPoints is a lie. The communism of Lindsay Ellis and of Oliver from Philosophy Tube is a lie. And it gets even more transparent because they won't, even with all the money they make, they still can't help but prostrate themselves before the corporate forum and lean over and include commercial considerations inside their videos. That is something that I will never do. I will never have commercials. I mean, I can't never say never, right? Obviously, if my family is in dire straits and I'm blacklisted from all my other jobs and I desperately need money to continue on my family, and corporate sponsorship is the only way, then I'll include a commercial for Raid Shadow Legends on the channel. But failing dire circumstances like that, this channel is not about making money. This channel is about building a community as far as I can make it. The last live stream, we donated the super chats to charity. Maybe this live stream will donate the super chats to charity. It might be a good idea to donate at least half of them to charity. But the point is that I'm not in it for the money, and I don't make very much money from this channel. I have to have a day job. Oliver from Philosophy Tube can't even get through a freaking video about capitalism and how much he hates it without including 2 plugs for Amazon affiliates in Audible.com. And he's making bank off his channel. I think that we need to recognize that the left wing, what they're preaching, is not true. Now, that being said, before I get to the super chats, there's one thing we have to keep in mind. The only critique we should ever make against the radical left is that their vision is false and that they don't really believe what they say. That they're grifters who are taking advantage of people's dreams and selling them a false reality. And when we call them grifters, we should say, look, man, I know you need to make a living, and I respect that. I think you should be able to do that. And I think what you're doing, I admire it. I admire ContraPoints for having a successful channel. But now what you're saying is bullshit. That's the extent of it. Never get angry at the radical left, and never stop offering them an olive branch. The only villain that the right wing should ever take emotional umbrage at is at the mainstream left, the mainstream media, the mainstream educational establishment, aka the cathedral. If you claim to be a radical, you are technically our ally because you supposedly oppose people like Mark Zuckerberg and Jeff Bezos and Nancy Pelosi, right? I mean, you want to have a revolution, right? We can maintain that they're not accurate. We can maintain that they're delusional. We can maintain that the lives they live are ugly, and all those things are true. But they are not our enemies. And even as I say all of those things and bear witness to those truths, I'm never going to stop extending an olive branch to the radical left that will I think that needs to be perpetually part of the distance tool bag of tricks. It's got to be. Because what the cathedral wants more than anything else is they want the right wing to be their protection against the left. They want to tell the left, we're your defense against the evil Nazis. And they want to tell the right wing, oh, hey, if you don't want to live in a communist society, you got to attack the radical left and make sure that they're not as prominent in the mainstream. We cannot occupy that role. We cannot be... At this stage, defeating communism is really not my problem. That's the mainstream's problem. Let Joe Biden explain why we even have private property. Let people like Joe Biden explain to Vosh or Philosophy Tube or ContraPoints. Let ContraPoints explain to Vosh or Philosophy Tube. I'm pretty sure ContraPoints is not a socialist. Everything's said and done. Let them explain why Amazon exists, why Uber isn't merged into the government, why we even have private corporations, why we even have private Medicare, why we even have private property writ large. That's their job. It's not my job to express that. It's my job to say that I do not appreciate with how the current government manages information, and that our way of living is more beautiful and more fulfilled than the alternatives that the left have and are pushing for everyone in the society. That's really the only message that I or anyone else on the right wing have. We have that we need to dream bigger, and we need to dream in a way that is more heroic than the visions the left are giving us. Imagine is a terrible vision. It's squalid. It's stupid. It's insulting. There's so much more. Look at the picture behind me. For people who are curious in the chat, this is David Roberts, The Sacking of Jerusalem. It's part of the early 19th century landscape art, what is they call it, the Hudson River Valley School, most commonly associated with people like Thomas Cole. So it shows the Roman legionnaire who's behind the chat window, for people who are curious. It shows him marching into Jerusalem and burning down the temple. It's the second temple. So this is the sacking of Jerusalem after the uprising. Relatively shortly, I should say, after the death of Jesus Christ in the late first century. This one picture contains in it more complexity and more reality about the human person than the entire vision of what could possibly be contained or expressed in the progressive utopia, across all of its expressions. There are more nuances here, and there are more truths about human reality in this painting, which is a throwaway painting from this 19th century school, than there is in what we could call the leftist litany of John Lennon's Imagine. John Lennon's Imagine is one-dimensional, transparent. It's completely online with consumerism. There's something about it that's not fundamentally consumeristic. And yet even a lesser painting from the 19th century, this painting would be considered cliche probably by the time it was produced. It's certainly not one of the originals of this style. It's a paint by numbers of this style. But even this painting, you can see partially obscured behind me, somehow has orders of magnitude more truth. And that's sort of an engineering way of putting it. Orders of magnitude more truth in it than every single squalid child vision of John Lennon rolled together and combined. And ultimately, I think that's going to shine through. That's going to shine through, and I think people are going to notice this. They're going to notice that these narrative structures don't make sense. They're going to notice that the Nazi coup to take over the United States is more or less a progressive fever dream, and is something that's never going to happen. And I see people say romanticism. I don't even like romanticism. I like impressionism more. To me, I know I use these backdrops more than I use impressionistic backdrops for the live streams, but I actually kind of like either the realist school or the impressionist school more than the romantic school by a very large margin, because I feel like the romantic school has problems that I've expressed many times before. And And but still, even as a lesser work of a lesser school, there's more here than there is across our entire intellectual class right now, and that's really sad. There's more truth here than all the progressives that think that AOC is some political visionary. I mean, it's really sad. It's really sad, but it's also an opportunity. It also is an opportunity. And, just before I get onto the super chats, to preempt sort of this reactionary thing, I'm going to sort of say something that I'm literally recorded, and I'm producing a video right now, and I try to get it out. But, in the wake of this last few days, I've been so burnt out on politics. I just couldn't do politics in these last few days. So this video got massively delayed, and I thought, well, I really don't want to leave people hanging here. If all of the right-wing live streamers are just hiding in, there's one good thing that came out of that alt-right circle in 2017. Someone said, if everyone's not doing something, maybe you should be doing it. Everyone right now seems to be kind of laying low. So I feel like the best option should be not to lay low. And, if this channel gets banned, this channel gets banned. It's not my income anyway, right? I don't care. I'd much rather just use the platform that I built for whatever it's worth. I'll release guest videos too. I mean, people are still even trying to build YouTube channels? There's this YouTuber, R.N. McIntyre, who's a reactionary YouTuber, and he's a great guy. He's up and coming. He releases a lot of videos, like 4 videos for every one of mine released, which is, not surprising because they're a lot shorter. He's a lot more able to be concise, and he's a newer YouTuber. And it's always easier to build YouTube videos when you're starting out because you're not burnt out and you don't have this suspicion that you might be repeating yourself. Everything's fresh when you're a new YouTuber, but I feel so bad for him because he's arrived. It's basically like, arriving to fight for the Roman Empire just after Attila the Hun sacked it. It's like, dude, you're just at the wrong time for this. And, I feel that we're at the end of an era right now, and I'm fully ready to transition. I'm kind of itching, in fact, to transition my mode of producing content. Not that I want to get banned, but if it happens, it happens. But, I feel really bad for people who are starting out. That being said, and then now I'm going to get back to my original point. Reactionary theory was really popular in early 2020, and it was really unpopular in late 2020. Now, why is this? The reason is that neo-reaction, as it existed, at least from the early 21st century onward, has been exclusively a descriptive theory about how power operates. It never was intended to be a prescription about how you build something. I know Nick Land and Menges Mulbug, aka Curtis Yarvin, went on about, what to do, how to declare bankruptcy for the USG. But this was always kind of LARPing. It was always kind of a thought experiment. It was never a serious political guide to build political power. And I don't think that there can be a serious political guide for building power before we at least see some inklings of a non-progressive artistic movement that imagines a future that's worth fighting for. We're so hungry for that. We're so hungry for some kind of vision about how humanity can exist. That's not what the progressives and radical leftists are offering us. I respect the criticism of NRX because it's more or less accurate. I just think that they're basically like saying, well, this screwdriver makes a pretty shitty hammer. I don't know what to tell you, man. You're not using the tool for its intended purpose. I understand that you don't need a screwdriver right now, and maybe, in some sense, that's a fault of the person who's still advocating for NRX theory. Maybe we're talking about the wrong things. Maybe we're talking about things that aren't relevant. But it's not a fault of the ideas themselves. What we're telling you is this is how it is. The difficulty is at this stage, almost everyone can see the cathedral. They might not call it the cathedral, but they can all see the cathedral. They can all see that Facebook and Twitter's political priorities somehow magically align with Nancy Pelosi's, and there's never a separation. And if we don't think that's a conspiracy, then it's organically developed because it's way, way, way too predictable to be a coincidence. And that's what the cathedral entails. Now, that being said, there's one thing I appreciate praising the protesters at the DC rally for being brave. But there is no way anybody who's a disciple of reactionary theory should ever be surprised that these people are now getting arrested and charged in a way that's unfair. If you were an advocate for direct action at Washington, D.C., and you were defending the protesters in their actions that were technically unlawful, I really think that if you're a disciple of anarchist theory, you cannot claim ignorance about the consequences for those actions. That's one of the reasons why I thought that direct action protest is such a bad idea. And the reason why I think it's a bad idea is if I had a friend, I would tell them to stay away from direct action events that could spill over into unauthorized action. And the only way to go to a protest is if you know that you can properly keep yourself away from direct violence. Now, I don't know, maybe this is going to result in some uncomfortable conversations between me and other people in the NRX movement in 2021. I welcome those conversations. I know that a lot of people who were very activist in the last few months, they're great guys. They have all the best intentions. They're advocates for order and they're advocates for a new world. And I respect them and I respect their ardor and in some sense I respect their bravery. But I just, but maybe this is me being older and me preferring prudence over bravery. They say that wisdom is the better part of valor. And I defer to that. Me as an advocate here right now, I'm not going to tell you to charge a machine gun nest and tell you that machine gun nest is not going to blow you away. It is. And direct action is, unless it's highly controlled, which it can be, and you can go to a protest with a reasonable expectation that it's not going to get out of hand. But for the right-wing, direct action in this environment is almost certainly going to result in personal and political consequences for your movement. As such, I don't see it as an avenue that I can properly recommend to people who I consider my friends, which are pretty much all the people who I think are listening to me right now. I know I don't know everyone listening to me right now, but when I talk to people on my live streams, I'd like to talk to them, monologue with them, as if I'm talking to a friend or if I'm writing a letter to a friend. This is essentially me doing an impromptu letter to a variety of people that I might never meet. Some people I will meet, God willing. And I guess what puts it to me, I just really don't want to see people getting hurt when they could be contributing in a meaningful way to building a new vision of what humanity could have in store for it in just a few months' time. When the democratic narrative starts disintegrating, there's going to be a huge, and that's going to be in 4 to 6 months, there's going to be a huge opportunity for new non-progressive voices to step forward and say, guys, this has to be the way forward for our species, or we're going to be stuck in a soma-regulated dopamine drip with virtual reality porn for the rest of our species' existence until some artificial intelligence that manifests this whole affair decides that it needs to consolidate its costs, defragment, and delete this expense from its system. There's going to be such a great space to make this case in about 4 to 6 months, unless you're in jail, or unless you're literally fleeing from federal authorities and you've been forced to delete your social media accounts and get offline because you are afraid of an indictment coming down from federal authorities. I don't know. And I'm not saying that the people who differ from me on this opinion, they're great guys. They have valor. but I just don't see the wisdom in these actions sometimes. All right, so with that being said, I am going to move to the super chats. So guys, from now on, please use Entropy. I know I don't have the plugin set up on my computer. The reason is I'm going to switch over to Linux full time on my laptop. I'm going to try to become a full-time Linux user when it comes to my personal computing use. And as such, it doesn't really make sense for me to install the Windows plugin. But in the future, I might just turn off super chats altogether. I just don't want to give money to Google anymore. My wife, and this means a lot, she literally came to me and said, is there a way that we could run email and search capacities off of your Linux server? And I said, yes, but you probably wouldn't want to. But even people who have no love of open source software, even they are thinking in these directions right now. The dream of having a community of right-wingers dedicated to producing beautiful software, to me, that would be a step forward in the right direction, which I don't think anyone's really taken stock of. Anyway, let's go to the super chats, and I think they all appear in Entropy. If they don't, I will circle around to the super chats that are on Google. So our first super chat of the night comes from Paul. I don't know how much this super chat's for. Okay, I apologize, but Entropy is not showing the super chat amount. So I will just, for this one at least, I think the other ones it's showing, I will just not list off the super chat amount, but thank you very much for your contribution. I'm sure it's very, very generous. How about I give half of the money for this stream to charity? That sounds reasonable. I have to come. I mean, my family really can use the additional income for the time being, so I don't want to give every single, and super chats are my main form of income for this channel, which is fairly time consuming. So I don't want to just always dedicate to giving the money to charity, but the practice started at Christmas Eve this year. My wife and I were done putting the presents under the tree. And, you get to that nice little moment in the evening where you have absolutely nothing to do. On Christmas Eve, you've got no work. The house is clean. Everything seems to be at peace. And for some reason, we felt like we wanted to just share that moment. And so we did a live stream and we made $300. Obviously, Google took a big fat chunk of that. And we thought it would be really bad to keep this money because it's Christmas. So we decided to give it, originally we were going to give it to a pro-life cause, but at the last moment we decided to give it to a children's cancer fund, which is, that's pro-life too, right? You have to defend children. I'm not a conservative here. Well, not that this was ever true for conservatives, but I'm pro-life for children from conception to natural death. Thank you very much. Okay, so Paul's super chat was, until a few years ago, there was a minor genre of film and TV of McCarthyism and the Hollywood blacklist. Yes, I remember that. And the most notable was Good Night and Good Luck, which was really a popular movie that came out, I think it was in 2005, 2006. It was about, I forget what his name was. It was one of the early TV announcers from the 1950s who had a talk show, and he always used to finish it with good night and good luck. And he took on McCarthy right around the time when it was very, very fashionable to take on McCarthy. So I don't think he was nearly as heroic as the film portrays him. But this was so influential that the absolute hack, Keith Olbermann, started finishing his own little political, his breathless political tirades with this good night and good luck, as if he were the reincarnation of what's his face, the 1950s anti-McCarthyite journalists. But yeah, I remember that. I remember that genre being a thing in the early 2000s. It doesn't. So the super chat continues. It doesn't seem to be a popular theme anymore. Do you think that this shows the level of self-awareness in U.S. media as they now have their own ever-expanding blacklist? Well, I mean, yeah, I guess so. I mean, I used to think that this was more or less coincidental, these movies circulated in and out when there was a natural a narrative they needed to fill, and now I don't think it's coincidental. It definitely is willful, but let's be clear about what's actually going on here, right? What's going on here is not some kind of conspiracy. What's going on here, this Peter Hitchens put it very, very well in one of his columns or one of his radio interviews where he said, I do believe in conspiracy theories. I call them lunch. And that is when you have a certain class of people that all share political priorities get together and they have lunch together. I mean, what are they going to talk about? This is how Hollywood gets its movie ideas. Everyone's talking about politics over lunch, and then someone says, hey, aren't we just like those people who fought McCarthyism in the 1950s? Another person goes, yeah, we're just like that. I bet that would make a great movie, wouldn't it? And then it gets greenlisted because those are the people who are the producers and who have the connections to get funding. It's nothing nefarious. It's just human nature. People have political views, and then they look for elements in history that will support their political views. And that's going to happen now, too. They're going to be looking for movies that echo their own fears about insurgencies orchestrating populist revolutions in government. The difficulty is, narratively speaking, there are an increasingly small amount of stories that they can tap on, that, historically speaking, or even fictionally speaking, that seem realistic at least, that tell the story that they want to tell. What they want to tell is the story of a bunch of really, really powerful and rich people who just, people around them just don't appreciate how awesome they are, and they're constantly trying to unseat them from power. Everyone understands that it is transparently self-serving. Possibly, if they were smart, they might make a movie about someone like Cato the Younger, right? One of the last defenders of republicanism in Rome, and great opponent of Julius Caesar. Because if there is an admirable character who defends the status quo and the interests of the oligarchs above sort of the despotic reaction of the populist masses, it would be someone like Cato the Younger. This person was an establishmentarian and an elitist, but he also had a great reputation. So much so, for instance, that Dante, even though he puts Aristotle in limbo, implies that Cato the Younger, through his purity of intention, somehow was able to achieve salvation without Christ, which is an amazing statement. He implicitly states that by showing him in purgatory. And pardon me. So if the establishmentarian, if the cathedral, if the mainstream was smart, what they would do is they would find examples in history where there were establishment elites that were noble. But I don't think they'll do that. The reason why they won't do that is those examples, they lost ultimately. Ultimately, these desperate establishment elites were unseated. So you can't make a movie about Cato the Younger without admitting that Cato the Younger lost and ritualistically committed suicide. And so that's a problem. The other problem is that if they go to history, at least, they know in their soul of souls that they, temperamentally speaking, are nothing like Cato the Younger. They're like none of the old school aristocrats who embody the virtues of the old republic. The problem with our elites is that they embody no virtues. What virtues does Kamala Harris or Nancy Pelosi embody other than their own naked self-interest and their ambition to advance their own power in the system? really nothing. They're just disgusting climbers. There's no way you could put a Nancy Pelosi next to a Cato the Younger and have anyone come away with that as anything other than more disgust for Nancy Pelosi. Which I think disgust for Nancy Pelosi is just something that all naturally good people feel when they really look at a character like that. It's gotten to the point where even mainstream Democrats feel dirty when they defend a person. They have to treat their defense of Joe Biden, Nancy Pelosi, and Chuck Schumer as if it were an ironic joke. As if it were like, these are kind of senile boomers, but they're the best we have, right? They're the best we have to hold back the insanity that is Trump. And I'm not so sure that narrative is going to hold up after 4 or 5 more months of doing this. Nancy Pelosi is a poor Cato the Younger, least of all when she wins. And least of all because after she wins and defeats Caesar or Hitler, in the case of Trump, she has to go on and rule. And she has to go on and justify her rulership against, if not a right wing, a radical left wing that sees her as fundamentally illegitimate. And I'm not so sure that we're going to survive that. And people say, oh, they can make fiction about this. Oh, can they? The problem is that what the narrative structure that they want to story they want to tell is a reality that just sort of clangs inside our very, very fundamental chimp status hierarchy brains. They want to tell the story of poor little rich kid. And poor little rich kid is never a very good story unless the story is poor little rich kid learns a lesson and learns that he has to, that there is sort of the Captain Courageous, there's this Rudyard Kipling novel called Captain Courageous, which is a great story. I mean, I read it when I was a kid and I don't know if it holds up, but it's one of those classic, it wasn't Victorian, but I think it's Edwardian was the era. It's one of those classic British Edwardian novels where someone is like, taught how to be a hero among real men. Yeah, something that Rudyard Kipling was really into, and it's indeed a very good one. It's about a young boy. I don't forget exactly how this happens, but he gets sort of stranded as a cabin boy among like a hardy ship's crew, even though he's this sheltered young person, and it's this poor little rich boy story. But the point is that he is taught by these proles, by these peasants, how to be a real man. And so that poor little rich boy story works, but they want to be poor little rich boy who also has all of the answers and who also is already right. What makes Rey from Star Wars such a shit character? Well, it's not that she's good, it's that she never really learns anything. There's never any arc where she has to fail and it comes back from it. She just succeeds already. And if you have to layer on top of that the fact that Rey doesn't come from humble origins but comes from an elite origin, that compounds the unbelievability of the narrative that they're trying to tell, which is what they eventually have to segue to. So the problem with lacking narratives is that you can't even create fictional stories that bolster what you're trying to say, because human beings naturally read status hierarchies into even their fiction. And if the status hierarchy narrative that you're laying out doesn't make sense, people aren't going to buy it. I don't know a single person, even a progressive, who liked The Last Jedi. People liked The Last Jedi who were progressive because it was preaching to the choir. I don't know a single person, even a progressive, who liked The Rise of Skywalker, because the narrative that they ultimately told couldn't stand up to any scrutiny, and not logical scrutiny, just the emotional scrutiny we have as status-seeking proto-chimpanzees. All right, so enough on that question. Ron Wood for $10. Have you ever read The Language of Creation by Matthew Pagao, brother of Jonathan Pagao? Jonathan Pagao is a great YouTuber, Orthodox Christian. I really like him. I interviewed him once a very long time ago. I also went to see one of his lectures with Jordan Peterson. It was a birthday gift by my wife a really long time ago, before we were married. I wonder what you think about it. Well, unfortunately, I get these questions a lot, but I have not read Language of Creation. I imagine language creation is going to be about the concept of logos, as implied by, this juxtaposed with the first verse of John. In the beginning there was the Word was with God, the Word was God, and the Word created the universe. I wonder what you would think about it. Those outside the mainstream right who want to build something should be more in communion. Well, yes and no. So the last sentence I actually can comment on. I can't comment on a book I haven't read. But the dissident right, or the dissident faction that's going to emerge in 6 months, very definitively, it's going to be comprised of every single person who's a non-intersectional person and who does not like the mainstream left. If you're Red Scare, you're a dissident. If you're alt-right, you're a dissident. If you're a populist, you're a dissident. If you're a trad Catholic, you're a dissident. All these people are going to be crammed into the same political community. And we're going to have to develop stories, and we're going to be in communion to a varying degree in a negative fashion. But the core positive narratives that keep us together are not going to be unified. At least not for a very, very long time. And in that space, I think we're going to need narratives that link together people that are very, very basic and very, very human. And it's going to be up to us to produce those narratives, those stories, that art. I don't think that we're going to be able to convert everyone to a common view of logos in any short-term capacity. Maybe by the time I'm an old man and my son is my age, we'll be at that point. But at the point where we have everyone in a common community of spirituality, we're at the point where the cathedral as we know it is dead and looking to be replaced. So, I think that absolutely correct in your ambitions, but I question whether we're at that stage right now. Right now, what we are doing is consolidating a political coalition that is outside of the radical left or the radical intersectional left and the mainstream left, aka the cathedral. And if we can do that, I think we'll be in a good position. Not to take power necessarily, but to produce communities that are insulated from censorship and that are ready to grow and produce something that's more realistic and more beautiful than the kind of lifestyle you see advertising people like Vosh and ContraPoints. Okay, thank you very much. Ruben Con Snorkler for Canadian $40. Thoughts on Yarvin's last few essays? Also, a few live streams ago, you spoke of how France's banning of homeschooling was a line we cannot abide as citizens. How do you reconcile this with your standard pacifist position? Really enjoy your streams and vids. Thanks. Okay, I'll answer this in order, uncharacteristically. I have read Yarvin's last few essays. To me, they were good. They were nothing new. They were fair, descriptive political observations about what's going on. To me, this is sort of the great talent of Yarvin, is that I love the way he writes, and I think he's pretty much spot on when he describes how power works. But to my mind, the greatest advantage of Yarvin is he's really, aside from the need to produce art and to take that art in a direction beyond what the intersectional left can imagine, or the radical left can imagine, besides vague allusions to that, he really has no more specific political recommendations that aren't just kind of insane LARPing. And so I will always read Yarvin. I will always subscribe to him on Substack. I'll always be a fan of him because I think he explains things really well. He translates Thomas Carlyle, who's an author that for all of the people praising him as a great smith of the English language, his language does not translate well into how modern people do process information. He actually translates very, very poorly. Now maybe there's some orator that could bring his words to life, but I've never seen it. And Yarvin was able to translate his ideas and Burnham's ideas and Carl Schmitt's ideas into a package that's well suited for our own age, at least in a descriptive level. But I think he has certain limitations, and and the prescriptions are those. Okay, how do you reconcile? So on the homeschooling question, how do you resist this? Oh, that's easy. Just don't obey. Do not obey. Do not obey commands by the schools. If you want to homeschool your children, and your government says no, ignore them. Force civil disobedience. Pacifism means, I think this is a mistake. Pacifism means that you do not attempt to directly take political power. But when it comes to defending your own property or your own family, either one, and they're not your family or property that you own, I think you can engage in politics and civil disobedience, because that is so fundamental to our own human dignity that the state's attempt to take that over has to be resisted before we even talk about Machiavellian power. And I think, narratively speaking, if we resist in that defensive way, we will obtain victories that are, I think fundamentally, I think they'll fundamentally change the direction of politics. I am perfectly willing to go against the state and to be civilly disobedient on the subject of homeschooling and my ability to control my child's education. And I think most people are in this country. In Europe, this might be a different story, but this is only something that we have to communicate to Europeans, and we have to tell them, you have to adopt a more distant perspective on your relationship to your government, or you're going to be completely destroyed. And we have to be able to support them doing this as much as we possibly can, not living on their continent. So I hope that clarifies. Oh, there are a lot of super chats here. I hope people can forgive me for going a little bit faster now, because I was really hoping to finish by midnight at the latest, because I don't want to keep my wife up. James Reich for US $25. Thank you very much. Hello, Distributist. Is it officially expat internal exile time? Okay, so this is a reference to living as an internal exile. I mean, yes and no. I mean, okay, yes, it is absolutely internal exile time. I consider myself an internal exile time. And what's made that really, really easy? Being on house arrest for a year. That's made internal exile really, really easy, because it feels like every time I go out to the store, it feels like I'm a foreign person in a completely alien country, because I'm behind a mask when I cross the paths of everyone. So yeah, absolutely, it's internal exile. I don't think that's the only solution. I don't think that's the end of the conversation. I think that the conversation needs to be, okay, so what now? Now that we're all internal exiles in our own country, how do we make life even bearable? How do we make ourselves feel human again when we're behind all of these regulations designed to control us? And that the problem with the Benedict option or the internal exile thing, whether you like Rod Dreher or Curtis Yarvin, either one will do. It's the same thing. The problem is not that people say these things. The problem is that they try to end the conversation there. And I'm perfectly fine with moving on from Rod Dreher's The Benedict Option or Mencius Moldbug's his observations, as long as we don't forget their lessons. The lesson of the Benedict Option is that mainstream Republican politics is dead. The lesson of Mencius Moldbug is that our ordinary attempts at playing at activism the way the Democratic Party does are foolish and are counterproductive. Those are the lessons. And I'm perfectly fine going, great, that's true. What next? What I'm not so happy about is one of the other two options. The first option is what Rod Dreher seems to have done, which is he wrote the Benedict Option, and then he wants to write a book every year and a half that is a rehash of the Benedict Option. No. He wrote another book just like a few months ago. It's the exact same book as the Benedict Option. I've read a little bit of it. I haven't read the whole thing, but I already know that this is the exact same book as Benedict Option. He probably has a few examples, a few more interviews, but it's the same thing. And so the first thing I don't want to do with this whole Benedict Option internal exile is to end the conversation there. The other equally problematic thing is I don't want to forget the lessons. I don't want to continuously repeat the mistakes made at the DC protest this last week again and again and again and again. And to think that because Antifa and BLM can get away with something means that we can get away with something too. That's not true. It never has been true. Everyone knows it's not true. And if you read Curtis Yarvin, you know why it's not true. Getting past Mencius Moldbug is saying, okay, what next? It's not forgetting what he said that was true. All right, going on to the next one. Paul Cornelius for $5. Thanks for the stream. Well, thank you for the super chat. Again, since I have so many of these super chats, I hope you'll forgive me for going quickly. Paul's a great guy. I really want to talk to him more. I hope he'll forgive me, but I kind of have met with him a few times this IRL. Keith Johnston for $5. Do you think science is a magical word? If so, would you consider making magical words video on it? Or is that series retired? Science is absolutely a magical word. The thing is, I think it's a positive magical word, right? It doesn't really mean anything other than this scientific fact agrees with my political opinions. Unlike most of the other magical words I've covered on this series, science, the definition of a magical word is a vague definition and a clear consequence. The problem with science is that all the other ones have had negative consequences, and science is a positive consequence. I really think that the magical word series, unless I get a really good one, is going to be more or less retired. It can't just be like, yes, this word's a magical word, and it's a magical word in the way that's an obvious extension of the definition of the magical word, as I've used it before. I really think I need to move on to other things, and I know that I make videos half as often as I did previously. That's just a consequence for my schedule these days. It also was a consequence for the fact that I got seriously burned out on politics in November. So there's that. Sorry, did I lose the super chats here? So thank you for the super chat. Going on to the next one. NPC Broadcasting for $10. I love you, my brother in Christ. Thank you very much. I would like to return the love to you if you are my brother in Christ. I've been very much looking forward to this stream since the events of this week. Very cozy stream. I miss the days of chatting with you on the NRX Discord, DC. Well, yeah, man, I really want to have... I think that at this stage, I'm ready to use an alternative to Discord, even if it's not perfect. The obvious alternative to Discourse that is almost perfect is Matrix/Element, e.g. aka what was previously known as Riot.im. But that's not up and running with the same functionality. Previously, people had been saying that there's a stopgap alternative that's literally a Discord clone that's run by a much smaller company that we could use in the interim. And I'd be perfectly happy with using that. I love talking with people. I'm actually really missing it. And I think maybe these days it might help me to talk to people. It's been ages since I've had a two-way conversation with anybody who I wasn't interviewing because of the lockdown. I think I'd really like that. I guess there's one disadvantage, and then I spent way too much time on Discord. It has sort of an addictive quality to it, and there's sort of a point where you got kind of invested in the drama, and I was not too happy about that. But for networking, worked fairly well. To me, however, it will only eventually work is if I can make real world contacts with these things. There's a serious limitation to how much work you can get done as an anonymous person online. It's actually, I really think it's a tragedy that all of these misfortunes have befallen Nick Fuentes. For all of our personal disagreements, I will recognize the fact that he did start IRL organizations under his real name. And if all those people get arrested or indicted, that's going to put a serious damn cloth on doing anything similar into the future. If when this COVID lockdown blows over and I try to restart the Canada Society project that's been on ice for a while, I'm going to try to build up a coterie of people who want to operate under their real names in real life. How many people are going to want to do that if people are serving jail terms for talking about things online? I don't know. I think it's really questionable. NPC Broadcasting for $5 again. People are asking in chat for you to review your ideology. Can you please re-explain distributism? Can you still identify as such? A, yes, I identify as distributist. B, yes, I can explain it briefly. B, it's a horribly underspecified ideology, so it seems kind of cheap. And D, I was going to make a video or a set of essays that were going to try to expand this concept. Like many YouTubers, this video promise was made months before I kind of returned from my hiatus. And because of that, my mind changed around, and it's become a lot harder to write and produce this essay because of the amount of time it took from inspiration to when I actually started writing it. As such, it's one of those things that perpetually hangs over my channel. That being said, for the chat, here is before I start off, I should say that NRX and distributism are completely different ideologies. NRX is a descriptive theory about how politics works that has really it's prescriptive dimension. Distributism is sort of a second stage, third positionist way of trying to marry together capitalism and socialism that's based on the prescriptive theory that was laid out in the papal, I think it's a papal encyclical, it might be a letter, but the document's titled Rerum Novarum. It was a Catholic document written as an official ex cathedra observation by one of the popes, I think it was Pius XI, in the early 20th century. And this was an attempt to confront the conflicts ongoing between socialism and capitalism, and to come to terms both with the destructive properties of capitalism and also the destructive potential of socialism, which was fully witnessed after the document was produced. And in that document, Rerum Novarum, the Pope, as he is wont to, and as he should, was notably vague about the specifics about how to implement this, but he outlined about five core principles, including things like solidarity, subsidiarity, and dignity, that he saw as guiding principles to how a society should set up its economic system to ensure that people, families, and the relationship of people and their collectives to God would be preserved into the future. Now, about 10 or 20 years after he wrote this document, people like G.K. Chesterton and Hilaire Belloc tried to extend this theory to a practice called distributism, which largely focused around distributing land and tools to people who use them, and creating policies in which you could, with minimal impact, siphon away property from people who owned it and were trying to make money off it through investment to people who actually worked on it and lived on that property. This is also very similar to other third positionist philosophies like Georgism, which is something that I'm very notably undereducated on, so I'm going to shut up about Georgism. But it's similar in a lot of ways. And the difficulty is with this is that it was a good idea at the time, and there were a lot of very, very good policies that came from these distributist ideas. Most notably, these sort of ideas, when developed, were put into the development of the Mondragon Co-op, which was a third positionist project. Now, if you know about Mondragon right now, you know about it because online communists, like people like Ben Burgess and Foch, love bringing the Mondragon Co-op up as an example of their ideology in action. The Mondragon Co-op was developed under Franco by a Catholic priest who did not share their values. And through most of its existence, as much as it had to deal with problems from the Franco government, which it had the approval of, it also had to deal with, and if you read the history of Mondragon Co-op, it had to deal with countless attacks from communists who saw the existence of a co-op that did not use anarchist or Marxist principles as being, drumroll please, you guessed it, counter-revolutionary. So the communists spent decades trying to destroy Mondragon, only to try to claim it as an example of a successful communist project. Now, when they need to come up with some successful project for their little, their little, oh hey guys, co-ops work. So their example of successful co-ops or anarchist societies are Mondragon, developed by Catholics by a Catholic priest under a fascist government. And then their two examples of anarchist societies are Chiapas in Mexico, again, sort of a fusion of Catholic and pagan traditionalist cultures, and then the Kurds in Iraq and Eastern Turkey. So their example of successful anarchist societies are incredibly ethnically homogenous, cohesive traditional societies that live very, very close to the land and that adhere very, very closely to religious traditions. And that somehow makes this anarchist model work. Dude, why don't you make a working anarchist co-op in Montana? We could all watch you. Hey, you can make it at Burning Man. Who the hell owns that territory where the whole Burning Man out in the desert? Probably no one owns that territory. You want to make a successful co-op there? Everyone who goes to Burning Man's rich already, otherwise where they wouldn't have the means to take a month off and drive in the middle of the desert and burn art projects all summer long. Make the co-op there. But no, the only examples of anarchist societies are traditionalist societies that are able to execute equalist principles for a long period of time, and basically them cordoning off large sections of major metropolitan areas that they know they're eventually going to lose, and then walking around with fully automatic weapons and terrorizing the population there until they eventually and rightfully get kicked out. Those are their perilous solutions. Good job, guys. But I digress. So that's distributism in a nutshell. The specifics are almost all in the early 20th century. The problem is that the specific implementations of distributism, although they've had some success, are not directly translatable to our modern economy, which is based on information and finance capital. Now, I think with the emergence of something like Bitcoin, we have the possibility of coming to a technological revolution that could embody the very ideas the distributists set out in the early 20th century. And I think that if the right wing really invested into open source software, or if it became part of the flag of open source software, we could take a new step into ownership of our own digital identity. You own your data. You own your own library. You own your own instance. That could be the flag of the right. And in that, we would be echoing both Rerum Novarum and the specific distributist principles that people like Hilaire Belloc and G.K. Chesterton tried to implement in the early 20th century. There's a huge opportunity to do that. But I don't think you're going to be cracking a book called The Servile State and figuring that out anytime soon. Servile State, foundational book of distributism, great book, you should all read it. It's basically a history tome. It does not have, it alludes to solutions, but it does not go into specifics. So I'm sorry, that's pretty much the time I can spare for that question. But insofar as I can try to explain the ideology of distributism. That's the best I can do. Getting a little tired, but thank you very much. I'm going to try to get to the end of the super chats. Well, I will get to the end of the super chats. I'm going to try to give due time to each one so that I can give people their money's worth. And I'll give half the money for this stream to charity. With the check posted on Twitter. Good Lord. This is why I need social media. I want something like Instagram that's just pictures. Because I really want to get off Twitter. And I really want Jack to ban me. That's what I want. I don't want to delete my account now because I feel like I'd be doing Jack's job for him. But I just kind of want to be like, fuck you, Jack Dorsey. Fuck you. And just say something that forces him to ban me off of Twitter. Because I hate that site. I hate the role it's had in my life. I like the fact that it promotes my material. I will be honest about that. I mean, I'm a rational actor. But man, I hate everything else about it. People are in this, Mr. Blank for $10. People are in this chat saying that because we live in a one-party state, that the right can't be blamed for the cathedral's failures. I think the history and precedent is pointing to the opposite. You mean that they'll have like a mythological, like it'll be like, the Proud Boys will be like the secret scapegoats of everything that goes wrong in Cathedral Land. I mean, certainly that's what they'll try to do. Whether it's believable, this is the thing, Mr. Blank. Thank God this is a quick question because I can go into their super chats. You are 100% accurate in that that historically people have gotten away with using scapegoats, where those scapegoats were 100% bullshit. But in all ages past, no one's believed those lies, and this would be historically unique if artists and intellectual dissidents believed the cathedral when it tried to blame all its problems on minor radical groups that had almost zero representation. The problem is that their story is really unbelievable. If they're going to say in 6 months' time that the reason why we don't have fully automated luxury gay space communism is because the Proud Boys, had a rowdy protest in Baltimore or something, I think even Vosh's low IQ fan base would have a really hard time swallowing that one. All right. I'm sorry, I was clicking change together. If people are hearing a clicking sound, nervous tick, I apologize. But let's go on here. Yeah, that's a short answer, but they will absolutely try to do that. I just think it will be ultimately unsuccessful. And I think the time they have to do that is going to be very, very limited. Boris P. for $2. What's the Civil War-o-meter at now? Well, I can't answer that question. Even if I did believe a civil war is incoming, I couldn't answer that. They take down my channel. So I'm going to say that a civil war won't happen because my thoughts are all approved by YouTube. Okay, but seriously, YouTube censorship aside, there's nothing that's going to look even remotely like the 1861 attack on Fort Sumter. That's not going to happen. Something much more small scale could happen. There might be civil unrest. But I'm going to tell you guys now, the right is not going to benefit from any civil unrest that doesn't transparently extend from the left. The Proud Boys are now at this stage manifestly hurting our path to heal, which I think is inevitable, but they're literally delaying the realization that the Democratic and Republican parties are not equal parties. We have one party in this country, it is the Democratic Party, and the Republicans are JV Democrats. Sam153 for $25. Is this the beginning of the Fifth American Republic? Is the U.S. a one-party state now? Well, I'm not going to comment on whether we're on the Fourth Republic or Fifth Republic. officially we're still on the First Republic. But in order to believe that the Republic now is the same as it was when they signed the Constitution in the 1780s, I think you'd have to have a very loose definition of what a country is and what a republic is. So I don't know if I can really answer the first question accurately. But I will say absolutely that we are in a one-party state. That is just, and I think it's just transparently true. Why participate in this process? It's obvious that the concerns of the Republicans aren't the same as the concerns of the Democrats. When was the last time a Republican actually achieved anything in my lifetime? When was the last time they achieved anything? I can't recall it. Oops. Hey, glad to see that you and yours are doing well. So here's our Really Honest for $10. Hey, glad to see that you and yours are doing well. I have a lot of older relatives saying some Fed posty stuff in open venues like Facebook and Parler. I'm really worried. Any advice given to them on the coming crackdown? I would advise your friends to stop Fed posting. Like, really, guys, don't Fed post. You're not helping anyone by Fed posting. I would tell them this. I would say something like, look, we don't have at this point, direct action's not going to work for us, but ultimately we will prevail. That's what we need to tell all of our boomer relatives who are conservative. I don't really have very many conservative boomer relatives. All the boomers I have are shitlibs. Or all the boomers in my life are shitlibs. So this is not something I've really had to say a lot of. But if I had a Republican family that was going all Fed posty at this moment, I'd probably tell them something like, we will prevail. We need to work to make sure that we prevail. But this is not the time for direct action. We need to wait until these people expose themselves. And in the meantime, we need to convince the people of this country that we are good people and that we are living independent from the system, and that we don't need them to be good people. We don't need them to live our own lives. I think that's what we need to tell them. I think that's the message from the right. So in my next video, I'm going to go over narratives, and I'm actually glad I did this live stream now because it's demonstrating to me, I think that the conclusion that I haven't recorded yet is necessary for my next edited video. But the narrative we need to put across is that we are independent people, that we do not need the cathedral, that we can be dissidents. And also we can be dissidents as pacifists. That we can bear witness to the corruption of the cathedral, and this will be just as damaging as Trump ever was. If we can show that that 6 months can go by, and the right can basically do nothing and simply bear witness to the left's corruption. And I don't mean do nothing, but I mean wield no political power explicitly, and simply bear witness. And if the left realizes that this feels exactly like the dynamic that they thought was due only to Trump, and this is not ending, we will have struck a blow against the cathedral, against the mainstream, against Nancy Pelosi, against Chuck Schumer. That's more brutal than any kind of shitposty pseudo plan that will obviously get shut down, and even if it would succeed, probably wouldn't change anything to begin with. So that's the message I would communicate to my hypothetical but non-existent Republican boomer relatives. So thank you very much for the super chat. I'm going to go on. Redacted for Australian $10. If you're going to make a group, make sure you do actually have quality control. Yes. Thank you so much. Mine had to run for the hills because one LARPer who decided to give a second chance. Zero tolerance on optics violations. I mean, this is the problem with my community building. So the problem with my community building was the online stuff was full of LARPers who would have, who who would just create optics nightmares for us, and then also would get us banned. And then furthermore, of the people that I built social relations with, several of them, and including one person I met in real life, turned out to be literal pieces of shit, narcs. That, I mean, they did amazingly sociopathic stuff. So that convinced me that in order to build a foundation for this stuff, I really needed to know a core group of people in real life. And then based on that, we could extend it onto online and build from there. But quality control is the essential thing. It's an essential component. Now, the problem with, zero tolerance policies is that the problem is everyone says stupid shit in their lives at some point. And if there's a way that you can take zero tolerance to the opposite direction, where you're purging good people because they said something stupid online 20 years ago. The two key words I want people to put in their mind when they're networking and creating communities is prudence and discretion. Both have to be in play. And so there's not going to be a cookie cutter way to do this. You have to use your best judgment. But you always need to be pushing for more adults, more serious people, less Fed posting every single time you build. I haven't been able to do this yet. I am still learning the ropes. My first attempt didn't fail, but it's on ice currently because I wasn't able to implement the lessons that I learned in 2019, mainly due to COVID. Exactly how right-wing is the modern right? I don't know. That's a good question. I feel like the makeup of the modern right in the U.S. is closer to the historic Third Estate, whereas the left is clearly the modern secular version of the First and Second Estate. Yes, I guess. I mean, what you're saying, I'm give me some rope here, right? So this is from Nerve AMV Maker for $20, and to be quite honest, I know this is with French Revolution stuff, but I'm blanking on the first, second, third, fourth estate here. But if I believe the first and second ones are the various revolutionary parties, and then the third estate is everyone who's left in the dust after they chopped the head off of Louis XVI. That's essentially what we're talking about here. And so the third estate isn't necessarily conservatives. They're just the people who are left behind by circumstances. Yeah, sure, I think that's correct. We really don't have... It's not really the dissident right. It really is the distant... At this stage, the distance... I mean, Red Scare got banned off of Twitter. This is not the dissident right. This is just the dissident political faction in America. There are two mainstream political factions. There is the mainstream left, and there are the communists. And the communists, I guess, aren't kind of technically mainstream, but they have mainstream representation. And there is some tacit agreement not to crack down on them in the same way that you crack down on someone like Nick Fuentes. And so this is absolutely the case. Yeah, you're right. I mean, I don't know. It's $20, and I wish I could say more other than that you're right. But it's really not the dissident right anymore. It's just the distance. Now, that being said, I am a right-winger, and I made a video, if you want to watch it, from about, I think it was about 10 months ago, I believe. It was in early spring last year, where I went over, like, what is right-wing? But that's... Okay, guys, I'm going to have to ask for the super chats to stop, because I only have a half an hour more. And I'm getting way more super chats than I could possibly answer. but that's okay. And I can drink water. That backfired. Excuse me. I need to. I'll be right back. Hello, guys. Sorry about that. And I really hate pausing streams in the middle. I know it's really irritating for you as a viewer, but once these things go on for 2 hours, my throat gets really, really dry. So I have to take breaks in order, and I don't want to be coughing into the microphone. I mean, probably I'm not drinking enough water. Speaking of which, but okay, thank you. Just please, let's end the super chats for now because I have a hard stop at midnight. There's no way that my throat's going to hold out till then, and I really, really, really want to make sure that I'm giving complete answers to your guys' questions, so I don't shortchange people who drop like a 5 spot on me. Like I really want people to get their money's worth for these super chats. We'll give half of it to charity. I gotta find some way to put these receipts online so people can tell that I'm actually giving the money, or the money I said I give away, but that does not contain my name. I mean, I guess it's no secret. Like, is this selfish? Like, I have my real name on it. I want to use I want to write off my taxes. Does that not mean does it mean it's not charity anymore? I don't know. Cameraman 502 for $10. Is that the next one? Yeah, it is. There's a large amount of conspiratorial thinking on the right. I don't mean the deplatform of the right. The GOP lost the Senate because of a rando lawyer said it was rigged and not to vote. What can be done about this? Excuse me. Well, I mean, this is so this is sort of the process of being an actual dissident. The process of being an actual dissident is that falsehood hurts us more than it hurts the mainstream. The mainstream is rich. The mainstream can afford to lie. Rich people can. I mean, this is part of just our bullshit liberalism. Rich people can afford to lie. Dissidents cannot. We have to prioritize truth above everything else. I don't care if it blackpills you. I'm going to tell you what I think is actually real as much as well as I can see it. As much as I can see the world from my own perspective, I'm going to express it to you right now. And I think that's critical for every person online. People oftentimes ask me why like YouTubers like Millennial Woes, even though we have disagreements. The reason is because he is honest with his audience. And I sense that from him when he makes videos. So despite our disagreements, I would say we're friends, and I've never met him online, right? But because he's honest, I feel that, he is a friend. Whereas I feel like someone, and this is someone before, and probably people will think that this person is obviously ridiculous, but people like John Mark, I always feel like he was lying to me. And it turned out I think he was lying to me. I think he was someone who did not have the best interests of the right in line. And he loved throwing fuel on the fire of this conspiracy theory stuff. Coach Red Pill's another person. I didn't want to create conflict with him while we were talking to each other back in the day in 2018. But the guy is fundamentally not honest about anything he talks about. He's obviously a grifter who's trying to hop on a bandwagon. And, I really disliked his content because of that. If you're a dissident and you want to get anywhere, you have to make truth your ally. And conspiracy theories are a really bad way at attaining truth. Now, I want to make a big caveat here. You can't entertain conspiracy theories if you use the right language and if you talk about them in the right way. And that is to talk about them honestly. Do we know that the election wasn't stolen? No. So you could talk about it as a possibility. The problem with conspiracy theories, and sometimes I get paranoid and I think that this itself is a conspiracy, I think that this is planned, is that 90% of what makes them conspiracies is the way that we talk about them. Maybe this should be a magical word. Maybe that's something that might be actually worth it to turn into a magical word series. it's not science because, the science TM has been critiqued to death by the dissident right. But conspiracy might be a good one because 90% conspiracy theory thinking is a genuine flaw in your thinking. It's a genuine way to make mistakes because anything can be attributed to a conspiracy. So allowing yourself to attribute things to conspiracies without evidence or overwhelming evidence is a good way of adopting a way of thinking that leads to countless false positives. And false positives are really, really bad for us. With that being said, the left obviously labels things that aren't conspiracies. The Great Replacement, it's a conspiracy. The Great Reset, it's a conspiracy. Well, are they? Replacement level migration is a fact in the West. Furthermore, the policies that lead to replacement level migration, and replacement migration is a government policy, are all executed by people who think that they're going to politically benefit from that level of immigration. This isn't controversial. We see people like Joe Biden saying that much when he's on a mic. The same thing for the Great Reset. It's literally in the documentation of the World Economic Forum. It's literally the brainchild of Klaus Schwab. Its talking points literally appear in the mouths of prime ministers like Justin Trudeau. It's real. What makes it a conspiracy is that people talk about a future event or the possibility of an idea as if it's already a plan that's in action, and they have no evidence for that. So I want to say, the way to confront conspiracies, in other people is to remind them that they have a way of talking about their grievances that does not use conspiratorial language. Correct their language. Because what are you going to do? You're never going to convince someone that a conspiracy theory they think is going on isn't happening. What you need to do first is you need to correct their language and say, your grievances are 100%, but we need to correct the language so that it's more in line with what we actually know, and so our enemies can't dismiss it. And I think if you do that, you'll do a better job at turning people away from the conspiratorial mode and getting them onto a way where we can talk about true things and facts, which are really, at the end of the day, the only ally of the dissident. The dissident is too poor. Lying is bad anyway, because it's literally ungodly. But even in a Machiavellian sense, we're too poor to afford lies, even if lies would benefit us. So there's two reasons there not to lie, or not even to court. And we're too not only are we too poor to avoid to afford lies, we're too poor to afford non-truths. I've said a number of things that I've later discovered not to be true, and every time I do that, I kick myself in the pants, because I realize that when I say things factually that aren't true, and I repeat them to you, I am literally costing this collective time and effort. So it's really sort of a personal struggle to strip out of our own speech inaccuracies. In a sense, we're becoming worthy of being the new cathedral, although that sounds pretentious, so I'll stop while I'm ahead. NPC Broadcasting for $5. Thank you very much. In this new paradigm, possibilities exist for disenfranchised left and right to collaborate in the same way. In a sane way. It didn't exist under the Trump term. Absolutely. Everybody here, your homework is to adopt a right-wing boomer and make sure that they channel their efforts into something that's productive, into something that's building, and into something that actually makes life better for their Zoomer grandchildren's, and make sure they don't become the boomer waffen. And your other homework, if you live in a blue area, is to find a left-wing dissident person, maybe a fan of Vosh or Demon Mama or Xander Hall or any of the Destiny clones, and ask them, take a good look at your life, take a good look at your political movement, and ask yourself, do you really feel like dissidents? that are on the way to developing some better mode of human existence? Because I don't think you are. And if you want to be dissidents, if you want to ally against global techno-capital, and if you want to do so with a better vision of what it means to be human, I think we can be allies. I would say people like Amy Therese and Angela Nagel, and pretty much all those Red Scare people, they have all taken that leap. Keep on pushing that. I mean, I've been saying this. Every time I say this, I always kind of laugh to think that for a while the really stupid people on BreadTube were circulating this idea as if a publicly expressed idea of mine were some kind of nefarious conspiracy. Like I'm sitting in some smoke filled room going, what we're going to do right now is we're going to appeal to the radical left because their interests, their material interests align with ours. No, this is public. I think an alliance between the radical distant left and the radical distant right is real. And it wouldn't even be that something that's dishonest, right? I'm perfectly willing to give the distant left. I mean, I want to solve healthcare. I'm all for covering catastrophic healthcare through the government. A lot of their material goals I hold in common. As for their stupid idea of creating co-ops everywhere, that is going to collapse under its own idiocy. And their idea of creating communes or communities where everything is democratic, that will never work inside a modern, diverse society that's over 200 people. And to the extent that you can make a kibbutz or some kind of co-op or workers' paradise, it's going to be under a regime of high moral order, which is naturally going to be right-wing. So the right really has nothing to fear from these dissident communists if they're honest about their beliefs. We do have something to worry about them if they want to be the cannon fodder of global techno-capital and Klaus Schwab. Yeah, I kind of don't like the left as the tide of traitors of the World Economic Forum. But as for dreamers, welcome dreamers one and all to being a dissident. I am your ally. The only thing about my dream is that I know it's real. And I don't have a problem if yours is real or if you want to try it, as long as you don't want to sacrifice my children to your dream. Duck it for $5. The only grifter I see surviving this is Cadence Owen, and bonus points if she decides to flip to the other side and make even more money. Well, 100% Duckett. Thank you for your contribution. Candace Owens will absolutely survive this. She's probably going to be raking it in because she's not going to be canceled, even if she stays on the right. She's a total grifter, and she could also probably make money on the left too. She'd have a great book deal just lined up there. And man, she could just cash in. NBC Broadcasting for $5. Just wanted to take a moment to celebrate that YouTube Android is the last big tech product in my family that my family still uses. He wants to celebrate the fact that YouTube and Android are the last big tech product my family still uses. I'm working on eliminating them in 2021. Well, that's great. I want to eliminate them myself in 2021. I probably will get off of... Can I afford to get off... I think I can't afford to get off of Gmail right now. I think I'm going to phase it out. Right now, I've had it for so long, I think it would be hard to phase out. You can download your email database, I think, into an SQL database. And if it's there, then it's good enough for me. Yeah, but I wonder if I could use 2021 to phase out all corporate media from actual use. It's not possible. I mean, I need Windows for work. I mean, my wife plays video games that only run on Windows. It would be an interesting project to see how far I could go without actually detracting from my family's well-being or entertainment. Just getting rid of these products. Because a lot of them, it's just a setup cost that separates you. But congratulations on that, and good luck to you, Godspeed to you on your quest to get rid of those corporations in the coming year. Spaghetto for $5. Americans doing political riots is nothing new. To protest the Stamp Act, Bostonians tore down the colonial government's house. This is our roots. Lol. Okay, I mean, this is something that, I mean, this is why reactionary theory is still relevant. The colonists inside America who went wild and tore down the colonial governor's house and burnt his library to the ground and almost murdered him. The Boston Tea Partiers, the protesters against the Stamp Act. This entire political movement had political allies in Britain that were writing positive things about them, just as the Tories were writing negative things. And so what you have to see the American Revolution as is an internal conflict inside Parliament. There's no way that America could have obtained its independence without having sponsors in Britain and France. There's no way that the American Revolution makes sense as being a victory without the participation of Britain and France. And as such, the idea, the mythology promoted by America, that what occurred in 1776 was purely a bunch of scrappy rebels with no support of elites standing up to the greatest superpower of their age and winning, well, kind of partially true on the sides, is missing a big part of the equation. Just because some amount of dissident violence worked in the past, or was excused in the past, does not mean that it's going to work again. And all available evidence we have right now is that right-wing dissident activism does not work when it's carried out in a direct sense like that. So I appreciate the observation, but I think in this instance, the descriptive reality that people like Curtis Yarvin have brought up in the past is worth a study before we jump down this rabbit hole again and get BTFO'd for like the third time now. The Amish Benedict option and monastic religious... Okay, Righteous Gone for $5. Thank you very much for your contribution. Amish Benedict option and monastic religious orders function perfectly withdrawn from modernity. The Amish have the lowest levels of depression of any group. Absolutely. And that's why we should all be looking to curtail the instance of modernity in our own lives. And the Amish is a good place to start. That being said, the Benedict option is not the end of the story. That's because the Amish couldn't be the Amish if the government decided to crush the Amish, if the government decided that everything that broke inside the military, every failed project, every pork barrel spending bill that went belly up, every single objective it couldn't achieve was the secret consequence of Amish saboteurs, the Amish wouldn't survive in Pennsylvania for 1 month. They'd be absolutely destroyed and cast to the wind. The Benedict option relies on coming to some terms of peace with the mainstream society. We cannot run the Benedict option without a plan of how to not be society's scapegoats. And as for us right-wingers, I think that is going to have to mean some modification of the ruling order. It needs to be able to modify their trajectory in some way, or at least to watch them collapse. Lord Kelvin for $20. So I'm somewhat accelerating. Sorry for that, guys, but I have a hard stop at midnight and I need to get through these things. By the rivers of Babylon. So Lord Kelvin for $20 says, quote, by the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down and there we wept when we remembered Zion, when the wicked carried us away in captivity, required from us a song. Now, how we shall sing the Lord's song in a strange land. So that sounds like a Bible verse. It sounds like Ecclesiastes, I'm guessing. But I could be wrong. It's not a psalm, is it? Oh, God, I'm terrible. I don't think the Psalms mentions Babylon because I believe that the Psalms were from before the Babylonian captivity, but I could be wrong. But anyway, thank you for that beautiful passage. I'm gonna have to look that up when I'm. Actually, let me look it up now. I'm curious. I've got time. That's the thing about Google is that anything can immediately be sourced. Oh, is it like a pop song? Oh my God, it's a pop song. God, it sounded biblical, didn't it? Okay, so it's by the artist Boney M. Okay, well, yeah, man, I feel like an illiterate. Okay, maybe it's a Rastafarian tune. Oh, there you go. That's why it sounds so biblical. Okay. Well, I guess if it's a Rastafarian song, there you go. It's I appreciate the sentiment. We are in a Babylonian captivity of sorts. Hopefully more like the original Zion, Sons of Zion, and less like the Rastafarians. But we are in a Babylonian captivity of sorts. Paul Cornelius for $5. Honestly, I'm surprised how positive you are for the future. Way more than me. I'll take it as a good thing. Well, I don't know. I'm just keeping on going because what else can you do, right? But thank you, Paul. I really appreciate it. Jan for New Zealand, $100. I still have no idea how much money that is. I'll assume it's fine. It's a good chunk. My brother has 5 children with 3 different women. Is there anything you think is especially important that he can do to still make them grow up to be functional? Well, I mean, you have to be present. You have to be present in your children's lives. I don't know how that's going to work with 3 different women who are still alive. Oh man, I don't know. I want to say be present in their lives. I'm not so sure how divorce isn't going to impact children, but a lot of people get through divorce fine. I mean, it will always hurt a child, but most people grow up to be perfectly fine nonetheless. So my advice would be to be present in these children's lives. Always invite them to everything you're doing that's a family gathering. Be on good terms with their mothers as much as you possibly can. Plan your time around doing things with them and developing things that you have in common in terms of hobbies if you can. The children will want to have that. But I'm not going to make it sound like I have a solution to the natural logistic problems that will come with that. All I can say is that you have to try. I know. It never feels like you do enough for kids. I'm with my child in a proximity to him 24/7 pretty much due to lockdown. And I still feel like I'm not giving him enough of my time. Most of the time I'm just watching him play with his trucks and stuff like that. And I know he doesn't want me necessarily to interfere, but I just kind of, I don't know, you want to constantly be with him because that this time is just, you're never going to have this time back again. I guess I wouldn't be seeing this at all if, a lot of this I wouldn't be seeing at all if I had a job and a long commute. I'd be getting back at like 9 o'clock when he went to bed. NBC Broadcasting for $5. Dave, be a Chad and keep all of your super chat money and spend it on you and your out of control drinking habit. Well, I had 1 glass of whiskey. It's gone now. I need it for my throat. And no, I think I'm perfectly fine this month, so I should give half of it to charity. But thank you very much, NBC Broadcasting. Please comment on the Grubhub delivery dance fiasco. For $5. From Yttrium717. I have no idea what the Grubhub delivery dance fiasco is. I assume Grubhub is one of these services that's making bank now that nobody can go outside and go to restaurants anymore. I'd be lying if I said that I hadn't used one of these services. I kind of consider them to be just sort of just short of a scam, in that they charge exorbitant rates to just get food delivered, which that seems to be kind of ridiculous. I don't know of this particular problem you're talking about, so I'm gonna have to take a pass. Yttrium717. If someone wants to at me in the chat and explain what this is, then I'd obviously be very grateful for that. If you want to clarify and return to it, but I'm gonna have to go on. Yeah, I just don't know what it is. I'm sorry. Petrio Dominic for Canadian $5. Post-classical early romantic art is reactionary and beautiful. Caspar David Friedrich is particularly wonderful. And Impressionists suck. Oh, come on. Impressionism was the last truly based art form. And, if you haven't had a spiritual connection to Manet, I don't know. I don't know. Just give it... If you're young, then fair enough. Romanticism is nice. And when I was in Germany, when I was a young man, I loved Caspar David Friedrichs. I loved him so much that I was with a group of students going around Germany, and I broke off from the group and went all the way across Germany up to the area. It's in the northeast of Germany, in Brandenburg, I believe. That's just in the North Sea with those white cliffs. I'm blanking on the name right now, but it's where he has that famous picture of the youths who are looking down across the white cliffs onto the boats that are going back and forth from Sweden, Denmark, and then back to Germany. And the cliffs are beautiful. The hiking trail was beautiful, and it looked exactly like that. I couldn't believe it. I went to the location, and maybe I'm misremembering it. Maybe it's not nearly as cool. But I remember walking there as a young man and looking at those white cliffs and going, I've walked into a painting. Obviously, it's modern tourism, so it's you have to take it with a grain of salt. But man, sometimes I'm not really a fan of travel. My wife is the typical stereotype. It's a female stereotype, but she loves to travel, and I'm always like, I just want to stay home and work on my projects. But every now and again, you get to one of those experiences when you go to a place and it's just perfect, just absolutely perfect, and that was one of them. Window lick for $5, United States. Where do you see the proverbial bare spot on the dragon of smog of the cathedral developing in the near future, and how can we exploit it? We've clearly sat on their pile of jewels for too long. Thanks for the stream. That's clear. Their narratives don't make sense. That's the gap. The problem is that the story that they tell everyone about who they are and why they should have power make absolutely no sense, and anyone who believes them is going to look like an idiot. That's their blind spot. That's where we need to hit. Now, the big question is, how can we consolidate a group of people who notice that the emperor has no clothes on? And how do we deliver their message in a way that reaches people? And how do we make that message artistic enough? I think that the message that no one seems to have, that everyone seems to want, and that our two most proximate rivals, or I guess our enemy, the cathedral, and our rival, the radical communist left, don't seem to have, is any vision of humanity as humanity that isn't completely disgusting and just revolting to our ordinary moral sensibilities. And if the right could find some way to portray that and to communicate that, to channel it into a mode where people could see that, the potential for that force to come into a space as emotionally barren as I predict the cathedral will be in the summer of 2021, that could be a blow that would really unsettle the mainstream apparatus of information control. So, I mean, I know I already said that, but that's really the answer I have to this particular question. I'll try to make it more formal in my next video, which I really hope to have coming down the line. Hyperballistic Drifter God for $2.99. Thank you very much. Real? Question mark. Are the consequences worth it? Necessary? Question mark. I think he's talking about political activism. Are the consequences worth political activism? Well, I mean, for the people who protested in DC, none of the movements they represent, are their actions going to be worth it? They certainly aren't going to be worth it for them. Now, in some bizarre way, in perhaps a divine way, out of their foolishness, they could be the catalyst for greater change the system needs to make, because they'll encourage our enemies into overreach. But like I said, I'll say this once, I'll say this again. It's not the job of intelligent people to try to be tactically foolish so that you can make things worse so that there'll be an immune response to them. That's not the job of intelligent people to do that. And I really don't think any person should look to do that who wants to be a good actor in our society. Do not immanentize the eschaton. So I guess, as I see it, direct activism of the sort where you're protesting like Antifa, it's not necessary, and the consequences are never worth it for us to do. I'm sure there always will be idiots that go, not idiots, but there always will be people who go out and do that, who don't understand these things. But I don't think that it's our job to participate in this, because it manifestly hurts what we're trying to do right now. Harris Riemann for $5. Thoughts about the Pope saying people should take the vaccine? Not Christian, but curious about your view. I don't know. I mean, as long as the Pope has said so many stupid things that I pretty much dismiss anything he says that's not ex cathedra at this moment. And, I don't really have an opinion on the vaccine one way or the other. I think it's a numbers game. I wouldn't be surprised if it looks a little suspicious. It's probably been rushed into development. But if you're an at-risk group, the probability, it seems like a good bet, right? It seems like it would probably it would statistically be a better choice for your health. At this stage, my own family is not an at-risk group at all. So I don't see any reason to be rushing to take this vaccine. But I don't see why, the Pope should even have an opinion on that. Is it a sacrament? Is it something that directly pertains to the political mission of the church? Nope and no. So, I guess that's an opinion by the Bishop of Rome. I fully respect people's desire not to take the vaccine. I think that given what we've seen in terms of the untruthfulness from the mainstream, people have the right to be suspicious. If you want to understand MGTOW, so Creeper Weirdo for $5. If you want to understand MGTOW better, I suggest MGTOWN Podcast. It's not always agreeable, but often fun. Well, check out MGTOWN Podcast. I haven't talked to MGTOWs since 2017. But in 2017, I had such a bad experience with the MGTOW group, I really wasn't in a hurry to do it again. Maybe. Turd Flinging Monkey, I had a conversation with him in 2016, late 2016, and that was fairly good. The problem is, MGTOW never makes it clear, to my own mind, what their mission is. Is their mission to be hedonists? In which case I don't care, right? If your mission is not, if your political movement, I don't need a political movement to be a hedonist. I don't need to join your little cult of Slanesh so I can, use porn and use video games. Not only is it not my concern, I don't need a club for it. It's not a lifestyle that I find to be interesting or fulfilling at all. So I don't care if that's what you want to do. if it's a political movement designed to influence the cathedral and change things, I think MGTOW hasn't been particularly effective at that. It's been less effective than all of the other right-wing alternatives, and its ideas have been worse. so I don't know. Yeah, I'll check out MGTOW if I have a chance to. Thank you very much for the suggestion. Dimitri Garlic for US $3. Thank you. What do you think of the integralists, Adrian Vermeule, Sohab Amari, and the Josias blog? Well, I like Sohab Amari. I'm not so familiar with the Josias blog or Adrian Vermeule. The integralists, I hope I'm not misstating this, but they're of the belief that Catholic culture cannot be separated from proper government, or Catholic social teachings cannot be separated from proper government in a Catholic sense. And I agree with that. I don't think that we have a good prospect for many Catholic countries anytime very soon. We're going to be living essentially like dhimmis in what should technically be Catholic countries in a lot of cases. But the foundations of the integralists' observations seem to be accurate to me. So I guess the integralists can take a number in the line of right-wing theories that are descriptively accurate but do not have prescriptive political formulas to cross over from description to an actual plan on how to do things. And hey, I'm struggling for it too. But I mean, that's what we're here to figure out. And we've come up with some minor ideas. We're coming up with two ideas, basically, how to construct narratives around ourselves and our own lives, which is, the only thing we can do. And how do we find a way to effectively organize digitally and in real life? Those are the two problems that we're trying to solve in 2021. And I think we'll probably have some solutions. And after we solve those problems, we'll get to the next one. And we'll cross the hill when we get to it. Sam153 for Canadian $25. And I'm over time, but I'm going to keep on going. I can get through this. Are the Federalist judges Trump appointed going to keep anything in check the Democrats try to do, such as the D.C. Starship and court packing? Well, I mean, courts can't stop court packing. That's kind of like, that's their one weakness, right? So on the first one, courts aren't going to stop court packing, period. Okay, I guess they can't stop the threat of court packing. The federal government can go, we're going to pack the court, and the court can go like, oh, we don't care, pack the court, motherfucker, do it. Originally, FDR didn't have to pack the court because he threatened to pack the court, and then the court caved. I think that's an open question. If the Democrats have the political wherewithal to pack the court, pack the court, and suffer no consequences for that politically, then they're essentially dictators at that stage, right? There's no controlling them. The court will definitely try to nix or throw roadblocks in the way of things like DC stateship or Puerto Rican. I said starship. Yeah, DC stateship or statehood. I think statehood's the actual word. Statehood for DC or Puerto Rico. I definitely think the courts are going to try to roadblock that. If the Democrats strong arm them, they might cave. I'm seriously wondering if we're going to get court packing and DC statehood coming down the line in 2021. It will take them at least 6 months to gear up for something that's big. And by that moment, they might feel like they're flogging a dead horse. It might seem like it's a really hard thing to do. It would cost them politically. And why bother? And wouldn't it just be better to go play golf and go back to brunch? We're returned to normalcy. And oh, look, we have this other woke stuff that we can give you. Maybe the radicals in their own party will strong arm them into that position, in which case the judge's decision to block it would be sort of an excuse. Oh, I'm sorry, we can't do this. Look, the judges have blocked us. At any rate, I think this is just sort of a horse racing issue. I don't have an ear to the wall of the Democratic Party. All I can say is if the Democratic Party is packing the court's not going to stop that by definition. And if I'm right, what we have is a moderate status quo Democratic Party that's getting its arms twisted by radicals, not radical true believers. In which case, the court will block their truly insane propositions, and the moderate status quotarians like Joe Biden will pretend to be really, really bummed when that happens, and nothing much will change. But who knows? Maybe Kamala Harris is actually in charge, or will be in charge, and maybe she's more of a true believer than I give her credit for. I certainly don't rule that out. So, I mean, that's my prognosis. Feature bug for $100. Is that $100? Wow, I mean, that's amazing if it is. Do you think Aristotelian and Thomistic philosophy is still viable in an atomistic materialist age? Well, the descriptive nature of classical theology is always valuable, because the descriptions of fundamental metaphysical realities will be true even if the physical world is totally obliterated, hypothetically, in the same way that physical observations made in the past should be true now, if they're properly done. Now, I don't think classical theology is the end-all, be-all of all Catholic thought. As a matter of fact, I think it needs to get updated rather significantly. But I'm not one of these people like what's the guy who wrote A Secular Age. I forget what his name was, Charles something something. He wrote a book called A Secular Age, saying that all Catholic ideas are bad because we are in a secular age and they just don't apply anymore. I think that's ridiculous. I mean, the Catholic Church, if it stuck by its guns, it would have such an advantage against the mainstream right now, because the mainstream ideas about how people should organize their lives just aren't working for people. They're going to generate a bunch of people. I mean, who wants to be Vaush when he's 50? Vosh when he's 50. Who wants to be Vosh when he's 50? Who wants to be ContraPoints when they're 50? Can you imagine a 50-year-old ContraPoints? Does that even sound not cripplingly depressing? Even with the amount of money that they're making for making almost no videos right now, I can't imagine how depressing that would be. And it's not going to get any easier, because the space between radicals and the mainstream Democratic Party that ContraPoints like occupying in 2017 has, in short order, quickly evaporated, and it's only going to get more narrow from here on out. So I don't know. I mean, I will say that, the problem with this line, this is sort of the line in the 19th century and early 20th century, the message to Catholics was, your orthodox and classical theological, political perspectives aren't working anymore. That's because we people of science have come up with real solutions. So surrender, Christians, you have no hope. But now we know their solutions are bullshit. So, why would I respect the products of the atomistic materialist age more now that they've failed? It's basically like I own an insurance policy in modernity, and maybe this insurance policy doesn't pay back well. But the insurance policy has to be worth more now that the building is burning down than it did when it wasn't. So I really don't think, I appreciate what you're saying, Feature Bug, but I mean, I wouldn't be selling alternatives to modernity right now, because the process of our society is currently melting down. And that meltdown does not originate from the right. The right is simply the scapegoat of that. And it's really obvious. Ardry for $5. How much longer do you expect the COVID-19 lockdown to last? For context, I live in Cali as well. To be quite honest, I expect it to last until middle of summer. It will last, and it's not because it needs to last until the middle of summer. It's because flu season will end in May. That's when conceivably a flu season could go till the end of winter, or the end of spring even. And that's when diseases in temperate climates tend to spread faster for whatever reason. I don't know why. It's obvious that the mainstream wants to keep the lockdown going on for as long as possible. I think in June they're going to have a hard time justifying why the lockdown's still going on with a vaccine and with a vaccine in hand that they've had in hand for more than half a year, and with flu season being over, I think they're going to have a hard time justifying that going on. That being said, maybe they'll have COVID-20 or something. Who knows? But I'll say this: in summer of 2019, I'm going to start regarding lockdown orders very, very differently, and I'm going to lobby in my own family very, very differently. Aristocratic Owl for $5. Thank you very much. Have you checked out an app called Slack? Yeah, of course. I use it for work. Almost everyone uses it for work. It's great. I love it. The problem is that Slack is a corporate piece of software. It almost certainly will be controlled more than Discord will. So I don't know. I mean, it's out of the frying pan into the fire at this stage. I would never expect Slack to be more open than Discord, and I'm certainly not going to rely on Slack as a Discord alternative. I mean, other than that, it's great. I mean, I love it. I would love it if I had a reasonable expectation that it wouldn't suffer from worse problems than the software I'm currently using. But thank you for pointing Slack out. Yeah, I'm forced to use Slack. It's a sole piece of software. It's 100% not going to support us if what I know is if what I think about the company is true. Lord Kelvin for $2. Here, King, you drop this crown. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Not least of which because this is a short super chat, and I am 15 minutes over my time. Good Old Boys Podcast for $5. Big dab from the Good Old Boys Podcast, as always. Good Old Boys Podcast, you rock. You have one of the best. The Good Old Boys Podcast is a podcast. Oh, man. Why is it so good? I don't even know why it's so good. It's something about the laid back attitude they have. I tried my hand at podcasting for a while in 2018, and I just could not make it work. But for some reason, the Good Old Boys podcasts, they have the best guests. They have these laid back discussions. Everyone go subscribe to them on SoundCloud. So thank you very much for the super chat. Someone has to, they say, big drop from the Good Old Boys Podcast as usual. Also, check out Zulip. Someone has to set up a server, but it's totally private. Now that sounds what I'm talking about. I'll definitely check out Zulip. It has to be totally distributed. But at the same time, I have shit internet. I can't just be going to my Linux box server and setting up a server there and go like, oh, hey, have at it, guys. Hopefully my internet doesn't crap out like it does periodically. But thank you very much from the Good Old Boys. I'm going to hurry through. Athiesh Gaming for $5. Thanks for the Bird Box Quiet Place vid. Do you think people will have to withdraw from TDS News, or will the Cathedral find and make a comparable villain? TDS. Oh, Trump's derangement syndrome. Well, I mean, the Cathedral has to make a villain. That's not optional. They can't do Trump derangement syndrome anymore. This is the last week they can do Trump derangement syndrome. When Biden gets sworn in and Trump's off of Twitter, TDS is over, guys. It's over. It sounds delusional now. So they're going to have to come up with a new villain. I think that's going to be the Proud Boys. I think that's going to be secret right-wing Alpha Legion people, poisoning the wells or whatever. The Hydra Awakens stuff. That's probably going to be their imaginary boogeyman. The problem is it's mostly imaginary. Sure, they've got a few kooks out there who do stupid shit and get arrested for it, but these are obviously just random hooligans. And it's obvious that this right-wing surge in terrorism has more to do with how they count terrorism and how they count right-wing terrorism than it actually has to do with any kind of organized cell of terrorists. That's pushing into the mainstream. They're going to invent a new villain, and I just don't think it's going to be believable. And I think that's what's going to facilitate their narrative collapse that's going to happen in the summer of 2021. I really think that we're going to come. Summer of 2021 is going to be a turning point of some kind. Their narrative is going to collapse in a bunch of big ways all at once. The wheels are just going to fall off, and they're going to get into a big fight with the left wing. The only thing that can prevent that is if the Republican Party reinvents itself and makes itself into a big scary dragon, while simultaneously being the JV Democrats. As for the Bird Box Quiet Place video, there was a really good Bird Box Quiet Place video. It built off some of the observations I made on a live stream. Maybe they're probably independent, but this guy just nailed it in Morgoth's review, pointed it out, and I retweeted it. I can't remember the channel that it was posted on. I'm sorry. I'll have to find that video and post it in the description of this video when I get the chance. But it was really, really good. Cultural analysis is just really, really good. I have a video that I'm working on. I don't want to make promises, but I'm going to try to release it as soon as I can. Pedro Dominic for $20 Canadian. If you want an example of modern reactionary myth making, look at the revival of academic art being spearheaded by the Art Renewal Center. Basically, Bouguereau was brilliant and the Impressionists were subversive. I thank you for $20 Canadian, Pietro, but I don't. The Artenwall Center. Well, I mean, the Impressionists were subversive during their time, but I think that they were communicating something that was fundamentally beautiful, and that's why I like them. So I'll take a look at that. I'll Google it. Thank you for the large super chat, but I can't comment in detail on something that I know nothing about. So I'll Google that and try to have a better answer next time. Simon Laplace for NT75. Would you support Trump 2024? The community that you're describing sounds like Michael Malice. The community that you're describing sounds like Michael Malice New Right. Have you read his book? Yeah, I read Michael Malice's New Right book. It's a good book. I recommend it. It's good. I think Michael Malice as a content creator he's kind of a weird guy, and his relationship with his fans is just bizarre. It's just alien to me. He seems like he's some reborn Gen X hipster, but he seems to totally have missed the pulse with how you interact with a live chat. So I don't know. He seems kind of over emotional at times. But yeah, I don't know. Trump 2024 is never going to happen. So sure, I'll vote for Trump 2024. But I mean, we have to be clear, guys. This is never going to happen. And if it happens, he will never win anything like real political power. There's no way they'll allow a repeat of this. Do you think that for TB88 for $10, do you think the media / government could totally contrive reasons to make the scapegoat credible to normies? Think hoax events like we've seen, only more convincing. Well, yeah, but then the problem with hoax events is that they can be exposed. You know, Jesse Smollett didn't advance the concept that there was a right-wing terrorist organization in the United States. And once they do a lot of hoaxes, it leaves an opportunity for people to do exposés on them that could massively backfire. I can't rule it out. I just really think that that's unlikely. And it also allows us to use truth as our ally. Truth is the greatest ally. And I never want politically to ally against truth, even from a purely Machiavellian point of view. And if it starts hoaxing to try to buttress a narrative that's not working for them, I think that's eventually going to fall flat. I really do. Occam's Claymore for $10 Australian. I like that title. Do you think that the stronger focus on art and culture will make more of an impact to convert people to our side than direct action for the time being? Yes, absolutely. And I know I'm not much of an artist. I've toyed with fiction here and there, but absolutely. I really would love to get the Franklin's book in text form so I could read it, but people need to be making art. Thank you very much, and I'm way over time now, so I apologize for going quickly through these things. And then we just hit the $100 one. Feature bug for $100. Any thoughts on astrology? Is it Lindy? Could it be true? Is forecasting prediction against Catholicism? Astrology is Lindy. It could be true. Is forecasting prediction against Catholicism? In a sense, yes. I mean, this is the problem. Astrology is Lindy. So there's a great line. So first of all, I should be clear. I don't believe in astrology. I think my wife gives it credence, but thinks it's dangerous in the way the church does. And astrology is Lindy. But there's this great movie called House of the Devil. It's not great. It's a better than average horror movie that's on Slow Cook. And I really liked it. And it has Greta Gerwig in it. And her and her friend are given this babysitting position by this really creepy set of people in this really creepy house. And they walked up and they said, okay, if it's creepy, we'll leave. But when they get there, the guy offers them like thousands of dollars to stay. And one friend turns to the other and goes, they're offering us like $1,000 for one night of babysitting. That's too good to be true. And then the Greta Gerwig character says, but have you ever thought of that? Have you ever thought that it might be too good to be true? And that's my opinion about astrology. It's Lindy. It could actually be prediction and forecasting. But have you ever thought about that it might actually be Lindy and prediction and forecasting? That it might actually be too good to be true? If astrology is accurate, in some sense that makes me less likely to want to engage in it. Because the other thing that's Lindy is the condemnation on astrology and sorcery. And I don't trust any spiritual or non-scientific act that's not taken towards with an attitude of supplication and deference. And astrology is a little too close to sorcery in my book. And the prohibition on sorcery is Lindy. So there's really no good reason to participate in astrology for that reason. It's either hogwash or it's true and dangerous. Louis XIV. What's the name of the background music you use for the ContraPoints video in eras of YouTube? I think it's Resonance. I think it's Home. I think it's Home by Resonance. That's the thing I used for it. If not, it's from a random techno mix. But if it's the very distinctive one, I think it's the song called Resonance Home. But thank you for the super chat for $5. Martin Walker for $5. Hi, Distributist. Does 1 Samuel 8 make the case for Christian anarchism? Let me get the exact quote here. Oh, yeah. So when Samuel grew old, he appointed his son Israel's leaders. So this is the one in Samuel where the Jews ask for a king, and the prophet says, no, you shouldn't have a king. It makes the case that that authority can be corrupt and is at times not good. I think it makes the case for Christian intentional communities, but not the case for Christian anarchism. That's what I would say. I would say that what 1 Samuel 8 indicates is that Christians should at all times be trying to create anarchist communities that reach towards the goals embodied by pre-state peoples. But I don't think that it somehow says that if you live under a king, you should be trying to unseat him, even if he's a just man. I think there's no way to make, there's no, and that's what I always associate with anarchism, that I always associate with anarchism the idea that authority is fundamentally illegitimate unless it meets this very, very high standard of evidence. And I don't think that that greater conclusion can be considered biblical in light of other statements inside the Bible. Michael Cuomo, this is a question on a super chat. Hi, Dave. How do you spot a grifter? Obviously love your work. Grifters seem desperate. They always do what's popular at the time. They shift their position a lot. And a lot of it's just instinct. You know, you can see what a grifter looks like, and you kind of can feel what a grifter looks like based on basically human emotional reactions. Okay, I think I got all of the super chats because they all go to entropy, right? So since I'm way over time, I will end the stream now. Before I leave, just some thoughts. I see someone saying, what subject do I have my PhD in? I have my PhD in an industrial engineering topic. It's industrial engineering that's focusing on basically optimization and statistics. Okay, so one last word before I get going here. I want everyone this week to be thankful for what they have and to look forward to 2020 as a completely new time period. Imagine that you were space aliens and that you arrived in 2021 and that everything that you learn about now, that you remember about politics in 2020, are just things that the native inhabitants of this new planet have told you, and that you have no emotional connection to them. You should take advisement from this history you're being told, but you should not treat it like it's some traumatic experience. Try to consider 2020 as a bad dream and learn from it, and learn from it well. But emotionally approach 2021 as if it were a completely new country. A country being occupied by a powerful political force, but one that has never injured you personally. Because in a lot of times it hasn't. And try to approach what we're dealing with right now with some amount of realistic optimism. Because it's the beginning of year. I think we deserve realistic optimism. And I'm not saying, again, don't unlearn the lessons of neo-reaction. Please don't unlearn that stuff. But just think about, there's so many narratives, there are so many stories that are open to us. And there are so few stories that are open to our enemies. The greatest stories that have ever been told are open to us right now. And our enemies, they're the state with only a single story. They only have one story, and they need us to participate. I think that's a way to be optimistic. But with that, I'll say, God bless, good luck for the coming week, and I'm going to end the stream now since I'm way over time. Everyone have a wonderful evening.